Recording in progress.
Bengicinga ufuna unisuspend. Good morning, honorable members. And I want to apologize for this meeting starting slightly late. I truly apologize. Let me welcome all the honorable members who are joining us physically here. I also thank you, honorable member, for joining us physically and on time. Might I reflect on that issue? There are members, provincial MECs from finance who are joining us online today. There are also various honorable members who are joining us virtually. Thank you to the team from National Treasury led by the Minister and Deputy Minister and the Director General. I see the Commissioner of SARS is here. Today has been established as a session for Parliament to be able to engage on the medium-term budget policy statement. Convening today are the 4 respective committees, 2 in the National Assembly, both Finance and Appropriation, and likewise the select committees of the respective Finance and Appropriations in the National Assembly. I will go through today's session. Today, I've got Chairperson Dr. Maswanganyi, who chairs the Finance Committee. I've got Chairperson Ndlovu, and Chairperson Lekhwase is joining us online. So the 4 chairpersons of the respective committees are here. On the agenda today, we've got a presentation by the Minister of Finance on the medium-term budget policy statement. Post facto, members will be allowed to deliberate on the aspects that deal with the statement and the medium-term budget policy statement. In the light of that, I would like to acknowledge if that is the broadness of the agenda for today, given that this is a joint committee, the respective chairpersons will make their inputs when necessary to do so. We have a number of engagements over the next while that deal with joint meetings, so that will proceed from there. But without wasting too much time, are there any other apologies that I need to take note of? Mashil, from the respective committees, let me start with the Standing Committee on Finance. Perhaps maybe if there are any apologies we need to recognize.
Yes, sir. We do have apologies from the Standing Committee on Finance. It's Mr. Lekhanyane, Mr. Van Rooyen, and Ms. Makhubele.
Those apologies are duly noted. From the Standing Committee on Appropriations.
Good morning, Chair, and everyone on the platform. We have got an apology from obviously Honorable Lekhanyane, Ms. Mukonto, Mr. Sigete will be leaving at 11 o'clock for another engagement, Mr. Mwali, as well as Mr. Gamede. Both Mr. Bateman and Mr. Kwankwa will be joining us online. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. From the Select Committee on Appropriations, or is there any apologies on that regard?
Good morning, Chairperson. Thank you so much. On behalf of the Select Committee on Appropriations and Finance, we have the apology of Honorable Swart, Mr. Khadebe, and other members will join virtually. Thank you, Chair.
Did you say for both appropriations and finance?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Thank
We
you
share
very
membership. Thank you.
Those are then duly noted. Are they, I know members have got travel arrangements, et cetera, et cetera. In the initial planning, even for me, the meeting was established closer to from 9 a.m. And so even for myself, I'm hoping that the meeting will conclude at just before 1 p.m. So that's what we are working towards. In the light of that, given that the agenda, sorry, I procedurally needed to ask if we adopt the agenda as has been prepared. It's really the presentation and deliberations from there. Is there a member who will move for the adoption of the agenda?
Yeah, I approve it, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member, and I recognize Honorable Talega Mazibuko.
I second the adoption, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Talega Mazibuko. So in the light of that, the agenda being duly adopted, the apologies being noted, without wasting too much time, I want to recognize the Minister of Finance. Minister, given that today has been established for deliberations, ndicela Madiba xa singayibamba nje sibe ngespeed so that we can give people an opportunity to deliberate, because it's for Parliament to be able to engage with your statement. So intshumayelo masiyibambe nje kancinci, then siqhube ukulowo ndawo. Enkosi Minister. Uxolo, Honorable Member.
Sorry, Chair, good morning to you, to the department, to the colleagues. I think we must give them the opportunity to indicate if there are any apologies, the National Treasury apologies, because I don't see the Deputy Minister, David Masondo. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. Let me allow that to happen. Minister,
Yeah, let me start with that issue. This time, Chairperson, we've had kind of two meetings at the same time. Normally, the standing committee, joint standing committee is on Thursday, NEDLEC on Friday. Now we have got both NEDLEC and the joint standing committee at the same time. We started NEDLEC, I opened the NEDLEC at 9. They're finishing at 11. Dr. Masondo is with NEDLEC and the other team. I wanted to make that apology for him. Secondly, I don't have the time constraint as you are. I don't mind, Chairperson, because I couldn't find a flight. So I'm happy to proceed until anytime. So having said that, let me just say, I'm just to say, as you are aware, the medium-term budget policy statement is largely a compass which says what is the envelope, and therefore what you must expect in February, given that envelope is not in itself an allocation for the next financial year. It gives you the framework, the envelope. So that's what we are going to be seeing here. But before doing that, we're also tabling the adjustment. The adjustment are of kind of three kinds of adjustment estimate we're presenting. The first one are the disaster for provinces. The second one, you will remember when we tabled the May budget, we made allocation to education and health, and we had to pay them in terms of Section 6 of the appropriation, but we need to formalize that adjustment and put that money back into the provinces. And thirdly, as the DG will reflect, is that we've had a better than expected revenue this year. And next year, we're likely to have some not fiscal room or fiscal space. And therefore, we've decided to bring in some expenditures, non-recurring expenditures to this financial year. So that's lastly, those three issues which are reflected. There will be other things then in the adjustment estimate. But moving forward, as I've indicated, we've got that fiscal envelope. And that fiscal envelope would be as I've indicated, show our capacity for next year. And in economics, people say, and let's assuming everything remains constant, that is likely to be an envelope unless anything changes. And therefore, we'll be guided by our four pillars in doing that. The first one is the macroeconomic stability. In the macroeconomic stability this year, we have introduced the 3% inflation target. By the way, the inflation is already hovering at about 3%. The Reserve Bank has done its numbers and we've done our numbers. We know that in the short term is likely to have an impact on the fiscal metrics, and we'll show that, particularly including revenue. We'll show that, but overall, in the long term, the benefits we're likely to realize outweigh the short-term challenges. We're also talking to the structural reforms and progress that has been made in that regard. We're also talking to state capacity, focusing on municipalities and particularly trading entities. We have taken the issue over the last few budgets, a strategic focus on infrastructure. And as we said in the speech, about 7.4% growth per annum, which present infrastructure as the fastest growing item on the agenda, on the expenditure side. But we're doing that in an environment which is not of our own choosing. The global issues, the domestic issues with impact on growth, which suggests that one of the things a conversation we need to have is how do we grow this economy? Because if to achieve better revenues, what we're going to require is growth. And that is likely to translate into better revenues, into employment and so on. Part of the strategy we're likely to see over some of the planks we've put into place now will have an impact on that growth. But we'll have a conversation moving forward. Those are the introductory remarks. And before handing over to the DG, and DG, you heard the chairperson said we should try and be as brief as possible, given that they've got time constraints, unlike me. I would have liked to keep them here today. They normally do that to me.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning to the chairs and to the honorable members. Thank you again for giving us this opportunity to take you through the medium-term budget policy statement. My name is Duncan Peterson. I'm the DG of the Treasury, and as always, joined by the team from the various divisions seated behind me. The Minister has covered most of the content on the first slide. So I think there we can just make the point which is in the title, which summarizes what the Minister said, which is very importantly, government is on track to meet its fiscal targets and continuing to advance economic reform objectives. If we go to the next slide, we always start with a view of what will happen from a global growth perspective. And what the members will see there is that the global economy has been more resilient than initially expected, but there are some signs of weakness. Global growth is going to be 3.2% in 2025 and 3.1% in 2026, which is below the average of the last few years. And as the ministers indicated earlier in his remarks, of course, we operate in that global context in terms of demand for our exports and so on. On the next slide, we then shift focus to the domestic GDP growth environment. GDP growth domestically is now forecast at 1.2% in 2025. But by 2028, we anticipate growth to nearly double to 2%. We have revised it slightly lower in the near term, and that's really because of weaker growth outcomes in the first half of 2025. There have been some delays in reforms, which we reflect on in the book, in particular in energy, the broader energy market reforms. However, of course, from a load shedding perspective, the economy is in better shape. There is the factor of subdued external demand, which we covered on the previous slide. But we do believe that over the medium term, the recovery is expected to benefit from continued reform progress. The minister touched on this, as well as the benefits of better macroeconomic stability. And that is something that we'll talk to in other parts of this presentation. Shifting now to slide 5, the minister spoke of the 4 pillars of the economic growth strategy, starting with maintaining macroeconomic stability. As we mentioned at the beginning, we are achieving our fiscal targets. Debt is going to stabilize in 25-26, and the budget deficit will be below 3% of GDP by 28-29. We are also continuing our work on a binding fiscal anchor. A lot has been said in the last few days about the targeted and responsible savings initiative, and we'll touch on that a little bit later as well. Just to make the point that we've already identified 6.7 billion in savings over the next 3 years, and we will continue to announce further scaling down of programs and program closures with subsequent budgets and MTBPSs. And then, of course, the new inflation target of 3% with a 1 percentage point tolerance band, which we'll talk to later. The second pillar is about implementing structural reforms through the Operation Vulindlela initiative with the presidency. We believe that these reforms will continue to improve efficiency and promote a competitive economy. Eskom has increased generation capacity, as we mentioned earlier. We've now had, I think by now it's over 170 days without load shedding. Transnet's freight volumes have increased, although it's still below their internal target, so there's a lot of work to continue to do there. Port volumes have stabilized, and we've introduced private sector participation onto the freight rail network. Reforms in water continue, and of course we are simplifying visa applications and implementing the electronic travel authorization system, which will help us from the perspective of skills and tourism. State capacity, as the minister indicated, really focuses on local government in particular, the review of the white paper, the Metro Trading Services Reform Program, reforms to the municipal infrastructure grant, and so on. This will all strengthen local government. And then we are also undertaking a big focus on the digitalization of government services, and we launched the Mzansi Exchange pilot earlier this year. Finally, infrastructure. We'll speak later to the additional funding for infrastructure, including for the North Corridor, which is the coal line, and the iron ore corridor, wastewater treatment facilities in Polokwane, capitalizing the credit guarantee scheme, which will de-risk private sector participation in transmission infrastructure. Regulatory reform continues as well. Amendments to the PPP regulations, Treasury Regulation 16, guidelines for unsolicited bids, and so on, will improve private sector participation in infrastructure. And of course, we've reconfigured the budget facility for infrastructure. We now have 4 windows. We are raising, on the basis of those 4 windows, infrastructure bonds to also ensure that we don't have a financing constraint on the infrastructure side. The next slide just summarizes some of the progress on Operation Vulindlela. I've spoken to this in the previous slide, so I'll skip over this in the interest of time and move to slide 7, that talks about the benefits of the revised inflation target for South African households and also for the fiscus. What that chart shows is that under a 4.5% target, prices double every 16 years. Under a 3% target, on the other hand, prices take substantially longer to increase. And that is why a lower target is really about lowering the cost of living and improving real disposable incomes for households. And as we all know, household consumption is 60% of GDP. So if we improve the disposable incomes of households, we also have a positive impact on growth. And therefore, lower inflation will support faster economic growth through the household channel, but also through the fact that aligning our inflation target with our trading partners improves international competitiveness, improves the performance of the exchange rate. As we said earlier, it will support household spending, but also private investment, because a lower sovereign risk premium, because of better fiscal outcomes and lower inflation, will reduce interest rates and therefore borrowing costs. And that is really why, despite the transition costs of a lower target, which is lower nominal GDP because of lower inflation, as well, therefore, as lower revenue, the positive impacts that I've just spoken to far outweigh some of these transition costs. And that is really the final point that the slide made, which is that the negative impact that lower nominal GDP has on revenues because of lower inflation is counteracted by a reduction in debt service costs, as well as the in-year revenue overruns that we've seen. On the next slide, we turn back to the fiscal targets. Government will achieve a debt stabilizing primary balance this year. This is the third year that the government has achieved a primary surplus, where revenue exceeds non-interest expenditure. And this will allow us to anchor fiscal policy by stabilizing debt in 25-26. And we will continue to grow the primary surplus, which will further reduce debt service costs. The reason this is important is because as debt service costs become smaller and smaller, the crowding out effect that it has onto other types of expenditure, social priorities, infrastructure, and so on, becomes less and less. So that allows us to direct over time a growing share of spending towards capital investment, because we are able to spend less on debt service costs. And we can see there that all of this is also contributing to compositional changes in our spending. So if we look at the second chart there, we can see that the fastest growing item of spending by far is payments for capital assets. And if you complement that with the infrastructure reforms that I spoke of earlier, that we believe will support growth. Debt service cost growth is now contained below investment, but also below the growth in compensation of employees. On the next slide, we talk a bit about some of the other steps we are taking to improve fiscal outcomes. One, the minister spoke in his speech of the work on a fiscal anchor. We do intend to present a formal policy proposal to the minister next year. But in addition to that, we are also launching a multi-year fiscal literacy campaign in order to enhance public understanding of fiscal management, but also improve engagement with fiscal issues and with the fiscal framework. On the revenue collection side, there has been an additional allocation announced in the last budget to SARS of 7.5 billion to enhance tax debt recovery and invest in technology for improved collection. And of course, SARS is also making progress on their efforts to collect outstanding debts. and the performance on the outstanding debt book will then determine whether the proposed 20 billion in tax increases that have been penciled in the last budget in the fiscal framework will continue when we table the budget in February next year. The minister did reflect on the fact that we have had higher than anticipated revenue collection for this year, driven by corporate collections, household spending, and that, of course, also demonstrates the broader benefits of the investments that we've made in this area. And then finally, budget reforms to boost efficiency and reduce waste. We have embarked on a journey to remove low priority programs and reallocate those funds to pressing priorities. We've already identified 6.7 billion in savings, partially through the scaling down of the public transport network grant, as well as savings from the social grants budget through better social grant beneficiary verification, and by bringing down fraud in essentially eliminating beneficiaries that should not benefit from social grants. Using data-driven approaches, we are identifying and removing ghost workers from the payroll. We've flagged close to 9,000 cases, and those cases are flagged either because they have been flagged as deceased, either from the tax data that we've been working with SARS on, or from the National Population Register, or there are other types of irregularities. For example, civil servants that are getting multiple basic salary payments into different accounts. And of course, we announced early retirement without penalties on the 15th of October in order to rejuvenate the public service and contain wage bill costs. The next slide then gives an update on the in-year gross tax revenue performance. As the minister indicated, it's expected for the full year to be 19.7 billion higher relative to the 2025 budget. That's mainly due to stronger net VAT, corporate and dividend tax collections, which has contributed to an improved near-term revenue outlook. Lower VAT refunds as well because of the activities by SARS in stopping fraudulent claims, supported by strong domestic VAT collections due to the stronger household consumption, and then also strong collections from trade, electricity, and finance sectors, which has supported corporate tax collection. Revenue buoyancy is expected to be 1.54 in 25-26, reflecting the strong. Over the medium term, in the next slide, medium-term revenue is projected to increase from 2 trillion in the current year to 2.4 trillion in 28-29. It's slightly weaker than previously anticipated, especially in especially in 27-28, despite an overperformance in the current year. And that's really because of the fact that nominal GDP has been revised downwards quite dramatically because of lower inflation, and that means our tax bases are lower, and therefore our medium-term revenue is lower. So we can see, for example, in 27-28, we anticipate revenue to be 17 billion rand lower relative to the 2025 budget. On the next slide, we then talk to some of the in-year expenditure adjustments that are being made. Compared to the 2025 budget of a few months ago, main budget non-interest expenditures increased by 15.8 billion in the current year. And this is mainly to accommodate expenditure that was announced by the Minister of Finance, but not yet appropriated, as well as some of the additions that we discuss here. Additions to the contingency reserve is being made of 13.5 billion in order to cater in year for the following expenditure priorities. The additional amounts to Transnet for investments in the iron ore corridor as well as the coal corridor. And we believe that that will translate into a stronger balance sheet for Transnet over time, as well as better fiscal revenue and higher growth. We are also capitalizing the credit guarantee vehicle, as we indicated earlier, 1.8 billion being allocated there in order to de-risk transmission infrastructure. An additional allocation is being made to Parliament for to conclude the rebuilding exercise. And then there's also an amount to the IEC for the 2026 municipal elections. This is also, some of these spending adjustments are offset by declared unspent funds and projected underspending, as well as some small amounts for provisional allocations not appropriated. So, for example, in the budget, the minister indicated an for PRASA for signaling. That provisional allocation was not appropriated because of a challenge with the capacity to spend those funds in year by PRASA. On the next slide, we then talk to the changes over the medium term. So the previous slide spoke to in-year spending adjustments. This is medium-term spending adjustments. We are making downward adjustments to some of the items of the budget, mainly social grants and conditional grants because of lower inflation. And that allows us to bring down expenditure by 20 billion over the next 2 years. We mentioned the 6.7 billion in targeted savings, and we plan to build on that. And we wanted to ensure that the any additions made over the medium term also are balanced with the revenue changes, and those are set out there. So some of those spending additions, I won't go through all of them, include additional funds for disaster rehabilitation, some additions to the budget of the Department of Defense in order to finalize the maintenance of some of the equipment, including their helicopters, as well as combat dress and combat gear. Those are the amounts you see there, 857 million and 899 million. Additions to political party funding, also additions of just over 300 million for the Border Management Authority for additional staff and other goods and services, and then additions to increase capacity in the Office of the Chief Justice, as well as Statistics South Africa in order to protect the integrity of the data that we produce. Then there are some small additions there which are detailed in the footnote. Infrastructure provision for royal houses, national dialogue carry-through costs. We are piloting jet IP investments in Mpumalanga, and that is going to require the setting up of a PMU at the DBSA, and capacitation of the National Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, as well as some additions to the compensation of employee budgets of the Presidency and the Public Service Commission to deal with COE pressures there. Then in the second half of that table, we then also show some of the infrastructure changes. There's a rescheduling of the Umkomazi water project because of, again, capacity to spend issues, also rescheduling of those hospital projects. And then we are making additions to the budget facility for infrastructure. And that is really about the Transnet costs, which carry through into next year, as well as some of the other projects. Polokwane wastewater treatment, the square kilometer array project is also getting some support from the budget facility for infrastructure. The next slide then just talks to the consolidated spending, which increases at 3.6% over the medium term, which is more aligned to the new inflation outlook, as well as to the new infrastructure investment strategy. So we can see there the growth is of the MTBPS relative to the budget. we can see there that expenditure growth is coming down because of lower inflation, which allows us to bring spending down. But I think the one important point to make in that chart is if we look at the 2025 budget, where of just a few months ago, where debt service costs was going to grow at an average annual rate of 6.9%. In the middle of the chart, debt service costs are now growing by an average annual of 3.8%. And again, the more we can contain our growth in debt service costs, the more we are able to redirect those funds to important other social priorities. 60% of the consolidated non-interest spending still goes to the social wage, supporting low-income and vulnerable households. However, to deliver on our fiscal targets, we believe that we still have scope to improve value for money, and that's why reducing waste through the targeted and responsible savings is going to be important. The next slide just confirms the fact that spending on payments for capital assets is the fastest growing item by economic classification, increasing at an annual average of 7.3% over the medium term. Moving on to slide 16, which demonstrates that the consolidated budget deficit narrows from 4.7% of GDP this year to 2.9% of GDP by 28-29. The public entities and social security funds and provinces and things like the UIF are included in the consolidated deficit, and they are expected to have a combined cash deficit over the next 3 years, which inflates that main budget deficit. Those public entity deficits are important because they finance investment in road, rail, and water infrastructure. Sunrail and others are included there. The next slide then talks to the gross borrowing requirement, which will average 5.4% of GDP over the medium term, and it is coming down by 20 billion in the current year, and also certainly relative to the budget coming down as well. In 26-27, the government is also receiving an additional 31 billion from JAFECRA as per the new agreement that was signed between the Minister of Finance and the Governor of the Reserve Bank, which allows us to revisit any valuation gains in JAFECRA on an annual basis and split the benefits of those gains between the balance sheet of the Reserve Bank and the fiscal framework to reduce debt. Coming to the end of the presentation, the next slide just shows that gross loan debt as a share of GDP is projected to stabilize at 77.9% in 25-26, slightly higher than what we anticipated a few months ago, but still in the current year, which is important from a fiscal credibility point of view. And then, of course, the entire path of debt to GDP is slightly weaker over the medium term, just because of weaker nominal GDP because of lower CPI. In terms of the division of revenue on the next slide, provinces' share of nationally raised revenue is projected to go slightly higher to 42.4% over the medium term. And that's mainly because of the very large additional allocations that were made in the budget for education and health, both compensation of employees as well as goods and services. And in education, that also includes the over 10 billion to early childhood development. The local government share is also expected to increase slightly to 9.7%. And these shifts are aligned with our ongoing conditional grant reforms, as well as the other efforts we are taking to improve spending efficiency. The next slide talks to the risks of the outlook. I won't go into those in detail in the interest of time. They are there for the members. And then finally, just to conclude with the final slide, which echoes the Minister's introductory remarks. This MTBPS is really about the government's commitment to fiscal sustainability, even in an environment where growth is not as high as we would like. And that macroeconomic stability will benefit households, businesses, those who want to invest and participate in the economy because of its impact on lower interest rates and therefore lower cost of capital. And the focus remains on those 4 pillars that is highlighted in the second bullet. Going forward, the government will continue to work to phase out and scale down low priority and underperforming programs, touching on the areas we mentioned today, and improve efficiencies across departments while directing most of our expenditure, around 60%, towards the social wage. And of course, infrastructure reforms remain a critical focus for government as a driver of higher growth, raising the potential growth rate of the economy so that we are able to create jobs and address all the other pressing social challenges that we have. Thank you, Minister. That brings me to the end of the presentation.
Maybe, Chair, we give it to you now. You can take the first, second, third, fourth round of discussion. We're ready for that.
You are.
So will be punished today. You don't have a flag.
It's not punishment. I just am concerned that the Honorable Minister wants to play Test cricket instead of playing T20. We're not here for 5 days. We're here. But let me, in the process, allow members, different committees approach question and answer sessions differently. So what I think will probably be easier is to allow and recognize honorable members. Let's take the first round and then we can proceed on. If members can just be in your questions and your inputs, if you can be brief and succinct, this way we can have more rounds. Otherwise, if you give a preamble that lasts us a long time, we're not going to achieve anything. So let me recognize honorable members starting from, I'll just work down the row in that way. Honorable Beasley, I see you, and then we'll get to Honorable Seate and Dalega Mazibuko. We'll just work our way down, otherwise it'll be a long walk to freedom. Over to you, Honorable Member.
And on
Chair,
virtual.
don't forget us on the virtual, Chair.
I apologize, honorable members. As soon as technically we will sort out the virtual members, you will be recognized accordingly, I can assure you. So you will be on next. I will get a list from who are the members virtually who are here. Thank you. You are recognized, honorable member.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I want us to agree that we should not rush these interactions because this is the only platform we have with the minister. He took 1 hour, 30 minutes on Wednesday presenting the MTBPS. This morning you took 5 minutes and the DG took 30 minutes. So we're engaging the minister for the first time, and therefore we should not, actually we should have called for this meeting to be the whole day for us to really interact with the minister, because there's no other platform. From here, we're going to debate. We're going to be limited to our 6 minutes, some of us, and we would not have done justice to what the minister has presented. More so that, there's not even a lot of members who are here on the platform. But thank you, Chair. Chair, I've got a couple of points and questions to raise to the minister. The first one is in terms of the consultation, Minister. Back in September, you said there's going to be a consultation before any decision has been made. But we see you having gone out to meet with the international market, the investors and whatnot. I mean, you said you had meetings with, I don't know how to pronounce it, Hohen and Offenites. And then you also said that you met with JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs in America. We have a couple of secret meetings that you held. But the social partners and the democratic structures in this country have not been consulted. So did you and the National Treasury consult NETLEC? Did you consult COSATU and SAFTU? saying that they are the biggest organized labor formations in the country? Did you consult or engage SACP because they've got long-standing interest in the monetary policy and macroeconomic coordination in the country? Did you consult your own party, the governing party, the ANC? Did you consult Black Business Council before you arrived at this inflation targeting? Was the South African Banking Association engaged in any official platform or so? Because we can't just say, well, consulting, but it's consultation out of the country. And then we see you coming back with a decision. This morning you said to me that your DM is meeting with Network, but that's after the effect, because you've already made a pronouncement. I'll touch on the economic growth. Minister, last year you projected 1.3% growth. You only achieved 0.6. The third quarter of 2024, you achieved 0.1, and the fourth quarter you achieved 0.4. You've now revised your earlier projection of 1.4 down to 1.2. These are the indications that we've always been saying, that we don't know what is the basis of your projections. Isn't it time just to just give up from making these projections, because none of them comes into reality? We are now we just finished the first semester of the year. You've revised down on something that was adopted 4 months ago. Your budget, Minister, was adopted only in July. And then 4 months later, your projections, you are revising them down. Are you going to meet this target of 1.2? What basis do you have on the table that you can say, this is what we have done differently, or going to do differently to achieve the 1.2 that you are projecting? Chair, on the debt stabilization, and I need to focus on this because I've jotted it down. Minister, I've gone back to 2022 when you tabled your budget. You said the gross loan debt will stabilize at 75.1%. That's what you said. And then the reality is that 75.1%. The reality is that it was at 77.4%. In the MTBPS of 2022, you revised it and said 71.4%, but the actual was 73.9%. 2023 budget, you said you're going to stabilize at 73.6%. It was revised to 77.9%. That's 2023. The same 2023 MTBPS, you said it will stabilize at 71.4%, and it actually went to 73.9%. 2024, you told us that it's going to stabilize at 75.3%, and it was revised to 77.9%. In May this year, you said it will stabilize at 76.2%. You've now revised it now in this MTBPS to 77.9%. So educate us, what is this destabilization? Your numbers go up and down like this. We don't know whether you are coming or going, but you are claiming to be stabilizing the debt. So explain to us what you mean by that. Minister, in your entire speech, your policy statement that you delivered, you only mentioned job creation once. Your entire. And we've listened to you even when you were at the Rand Merchant Bank breakfast session yesterday. You again repeated the same narrative that says there's going to be reforms and economic growth. But there's no commitment coming from your MTBPS in terms of job creation. Actually, you have not even mentioned the statistics of unemployment in your entire document. We're speaking now today, the expanded unemployment is sitting at 42%. 42% of people who ordinarily should be working are not working. Some have even given hope, lost hope of ever finding jobs. And there you come, Minister, saying absolutely nothing about job creation, which, by the way, it's your strategic objective to achieve as the Minister of Finance. We now go to SRD. What exactly is your position on SR? Because we don't hear you. You say, yeah, you know, we'll review it, we'll revisit it. Has cabinet taken a decision on the future of SRD grant? Or is this once again Treasury's unilateral preference that it will be presented as if it's a government policy? So what is the position? Our people need to know what is the position of on SRG. To the commissioner, you know, we fought so much with you, Minister, to allocate additional money to SARS so that SARS can increase the debt collection by 20 billion. But we are standing here now. We don't see that additional 20 billion, Commissioner, that you promised us. You promised this parliament that if this man in front of me gives you additional funds, you're going to give us additional 20 billion. With the latest performance of SARS, we don't see it coming. And what is more painful, Chair, is that the commissioner is saying he's leaving office. This morning, I thought it was December, which is next month. This morning I asked him, he said, there's no date yet. We are sitting with a situation where he might not be here end of the financial year for us to look at his performance and him asking him to explain himself why he promised the country an additional 20 billion, which is nowhere to be found now. My last 2 points, Chair. Scaling down on the public transport network grant. What informs that, Minister? You know, PBO went to Scopa, and I'm happy because the chairperson, or it's not the chairperson of Scopa, but all these chairs, they can watch committees. The PBO went to Scopa and said, our people, they spent money on transport and electricity in the main on their salaries. So they get salary to be able to go back to work tomorrow. But that salary is not taking them anywhere. It's just to keep them coming to work. Does not develop, does not translate into developing this. Now, if you are going to scale down on the public transport network grant, can you imagine what burden you're putting really on our people? There's no reliable, at the moment, functioning trains. There's no reliable and safe, reliable buses. There's no safe and affordable taxi transport for our workers. Where must they go? How are they going to go to work if you're going to scale down on that? DG spoke about the BMA, Border Management Agency, where SARS is always complaining that there's so much illicit trade that comes through our borders because the borders don't have scanners, don't have personnel, they are working at skeletal staff. Only now, the DG is telling us that he's going to increase money because he wants the borders to be, the positions to be filled. Isn't it too late? Are you not enabling this illicit trade in cigarettes and alcohol by not resourcing our borders properly so that the border management can function optimally? I mean, if only 40% of the goods that comes into the country go through scanners, and by the way, the Lieutenant Mkhonas was there at the ad hoc committee saying that.
Honorable Member, if I can ask, I know you have asked us to spend the day. I just want to sensitize you to that. I've got a speakers list of 16.
Yeah, but you can't be told by Beasley. Beasley is sitting
not-
here next to me, indicating to you the time.
No,
Why are you being led by
Honorable
Beasley?
Member,
I said to you, I'm closing down, Chair. Allow me to finish.
I have a timer here. You've been going on.
We have not
for
agreed
9
on
minutes.
any time, Chairperson.
Yes, I want
Please
to
don't.
indicate.
No. Firstly, you are late. You came late to this meeting. We waited
No,
for you for
let's
10
not-
minutes.
Honorable Member, let's not personalize. this.
No, we're not personalizing. I'm just stating a fact. You
So if
came
you
here
could
10
re-
minutes late.
if you
We
could
have
not-
not
was-
spoken and agreed
was
on
not-
how much time we're going to give to each member. And
Honorable-
I want you not to be doing what you're doing, Chair.
Honorable Member, can I ask you to wrap up your input?
Yes, I'm wrapping up
Thank you.
without being put under pressure, Chair, at all. That I take personal because I'm representing a constituency that needs answers.
So is everyone
Please.
else.
Yes, so is everybody else. We agree.
If you can wrap it up, please.
So are you not enabling this illicit trade, Chair, Minister, by not funding these borders adequately. The last point, Minister, we've given up hope. Actually, we've reached a conclusion that you actually hate Black people. And our reason for that is that in March, you attempted a VAT increase. Then you came with fuel increase. Now you are coming with inflation targeting, which essentially means people who are loaning money from the banks are going to pay high interest rates. So who gets to benefit from this? It's actually the bank at the expense of our people. And therefore, we've got no confidence in you. We actually came to a conclusion that you don't love Black people. Thank you.
Honorable members, if I can request, I tried to give a guide earlier on. If I can request that members will keep their inputs to 5 minutes. Because if we don't achieve the 5 minutes bit, I can assure you the speakers list is sitting at 16 at this point in time. So I'm just conscientizing members that it's not about my own preference or not. It's about making sure that we can afford every party and every member an opportunity to engage. So, Honorable Beasley, your 5 minutes.
Chair, okay.
16 also includes the members who are online. I have noted that there are 4 of you, Honorable Wesley, Honorable Kwankwa, Honorable Bateman, Honorable Siwisa is what has been circulated to me. If there are additional, I will take note of them. Thank you.
Minister, Deputy Minister, DG, Commissioner, Deputy Commissioners, staff of National Treasury, colleagues. So I think, Minister, for me, the massive disappointment in this budget was just the GDP growth. It's just, and I was very surprised to see the GNU stand and applaud 1.2%. You spoke about environment, not of our own choosing, but Sub-Saharan Africa is growing at 4.1%. So we're clearly scoring some own goals in our country, and we're not going to address unemployment, poverty, inequality with GDP growth like this. And there's clearly some structural issues at play that need to be addressed because it's just simply not acceptable. And I disagree with my colleague next to me about revenue. I think SARS has performed exceptionally well, and I think that every single 14,000 members of SARS can sleep well at night knowing that they've collected an extra 19.7 billion. It's not easy in this economy. My understanding is you've collected more than 9% compared to last year, which is exceptional in a low GDP environment. So, and I think as Action SA, we've been vindicated by fighting for money for SARS. We will continue to do so. And I think the greatest legacy 7th Parliament SCOF can do is make sure when we leave, SARS is adequately funded. And I think to be assessed on your debt collection in the first couple of months, I think you've just received is totally unfair. And I think it's unfair for the minister to say VAT increase depends on that 20 million from debt collection. I think it needs to have an overall impact. If SARS collects more money, we shouldn't pay any more VAT. And then I'm absolutely delighted, Minister, you put the illicit economy on in your speech. It's destroying the economy. Illicit economy is growing quicker than the legal economy. But I do think National Treasury and Finance has played a role in this by increasing excise tax more than inflation, because essentially we're making illegal products far more cheaper than legal. We're just scoring a massive goal, and it needs to stop. And I'm sure it will stop, because it'll be nonsensical raising it and increasing excise tax more than inflation. And then in terms of target and responsible saving, Minister, I can point you once so quickly that will save you more than 6.7 billion over 3 years, and that is a bloated cabinet. I know it's not your prerogative, but there's that saying, when good people say nothing, evil flourishes. You can save a huge amount of money in that regard. I was standing outside the other day when cabinet was discharged. It was leaving a full stadium after a soccer game. There were just so many people leaving. You know, there's 43 deputy ministers. We don't know what they do. They don't know what they do, yet we've got 43. And so I think that should be the first area we save. And we can only set an example. We can only ask other people to tighten their belts if we're prepared to tighten our belts as the executive. And in terms of the procurement payment dashboard, I think it's an excellent idea. But I come back to the fact, and I know it's not National Treasury's responsibility, and I'm looking at introducing legislation. SIU have identified 467 companies to be blacklisted. Only one is. They shouldn't be dealing with the state. mean, but I know it's not National Treasury. I know there's legislation, but to me, it just breaks my heart when SIU does all this hard work and only one of the 467. We can look at the dashboard, but these guys will be dealing with the state who've stolen from the state to be looking at the dashboard, and they keep dealing. And then Minister, DG, one that should be giving you sleeping nights is RAF. I've been sitting on Scopa. There's 500 billion unrecorded liabilities. There's not a matching asset, so there's a hole. And I don't know how that hole is going to be funded, but it's a big train wreck coming, and it must be created. 500 billion is massive. It's massive. It's massive. It's a massive hole, and I don't see much coverage. It's like putting their heads in the sand and hoping it's going to go away, but it's not going, because there's judgments every single day being awarded against the RAF that they aren't honoring, and it's just building up, and it's 500 billion. And then lastly, Minister, if you can just comment on the upgrade tonight. We're all hoping that it gets upgraded. Just have you got any thoughts on the SNP upgrade tonight? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Beasley. The Honorable Siate.
Thank you, Chair. Let me start off by welcoming the presentation and the report from the Minister. Greetings to colleagues, staff members, support, everybody that is on the virtual platform as well. So firstly, I'd like to just, Minister, welcome in one of your steps to improve the fiscal outcome. You did mention the part where you said you will have the multi-year literacy campaign. This is welcomed from us. It sounds more like it is broadening the role players, it is broadening participation and more on the consultation. So my issue around that though would be perhaps if the department can stretch out and detail who are these role players that will be doing this multi-year, the fiscal literacy program or campaign. How is it going to be rolled out? And to some larger extent, also just check how much is this exercise going to cost, because it sounds to us like more like a public participation exercise. So I just want to understand there when you roll it out, how is it going to, it is found on slide 9, says multi-year fiscal literacy campaign will be launched. So just my interest there on the role players, facilitators, because we don't want a situation where the department, the National Treasury is accused of having some role players that we don't understand their role and how legislative arm is empowering them to roll out such programs. So on the fiscal framework and debt consolidation, so I'd like to understand what trade-offs did the Treasury consider when deciding to stabilize the debt to GDP ratio and the budget deficit over stabilizing employment, poverty, and inequality. So put differently, and just for a layman, in a ward in some local municipality or village in South Africa, why does 2025 MTBPS pretend that the triple challenges of poverty, inequality, and unemployment do not exist, as there is little evidence, Minister, that shows or direct the fiscal policy interventions aimed at reducing unemployment and inequality, which have grown since the advent of democracy, and Treasury's preoccupation only with the fiscal consolidation. So second to that, what assessment has the Treasury done to ascertain why the gross fixed capital formation remains low despite its pursuit of macroeconomic stability, which is the natural prerequisite of securing business or investor confidence and for providing the private sector with a free and stable market that can prompt investment and development. And lastly, Minister, what are the reasons then why the 2025 MTBPS treats South Africa's ailing economy as a supply side problem, when demand side problems such as weak aggregate demand, low public investment, and stagnant wages are equally binding constraints? Given that the level of aggregate demand is key to driving economic growth in both the short and long run, why is there no explicit strategy in 2025 MTBPS to boost consumer demand spending in a country where household consumption is responsible for approximately 60 to 62% of the GDP? Put differently again, for a layman seated somewhere in some village, how does Treasury justify its economic growth projections without an adequate fiscal policy approach that stimulates the economy, boosts the aggregate demand, and responds to stagnant wages that further weaken consumer spending? Or alternatively, which interventions, Minister, is the 2025 MTBPS directly aimed to increase the purchase power, the buying power of that person in the village that I'm
As you
talking
wrap
about?
up, Honorable.
Parity of poor and working class household, particularly given these households have highest marginal propensity to consume. I'm forced to close, Chair, but I'm not very happy because you had not indicated the speaking time for us. So we thought we had the whole day, as colleague and minister had said.
No, I understand, Honorable Siate, but
Yeah.
post earlier on, we did speak and note that all the members will have 5 minutes. So I did, when you started your input, indicate that our 5 minutes begins now. If we get through, I reiterate, I'm not personalizing this issue, I reiterate. We have 16 speakers on the list. We get through those. We did start at the beginning to say we'll have the first and the second round. If we get it right, let's keep going. But if we can acknowledge 5 minutes this way, all the members can be able to give their inputs. So I did at the beginning, post the honorable member from the EFF make that intervention. So let us then proceed to Honorable Gallagher Mazibuko, if that's okay with you, Honorable Siat. Thank you, Honorable Gallagher Mazibuko.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, noting that Honorable Mountwe has taken all our time, so she's got a fair proportional allocation in this meeting. Chair, welcoming the presentation. She's the majority party in this meeting. She's getting more proportional time. Chair, let me welcome the presentations as per my colleagues. Firstly, I want to appreciate the allocation for Parliament, for the rebuilding of Parliament. I think some of us did not have that opportunity to be in the proper Parliament as we started in this 7th administration. However, Chair, in the meantime, Parliament is supposed to be held at the Dome. And we were removed from the Dome for reasons that the Dome needed to be fixed in a way. So, and there's nothing that is being said about the Dome. So is the Dome going to be fixed? Is there amount allocated for the Dome? And the second question is on the rescheduling. I think it's what slide number is this one? The rescheduling of Umkomazi Water Project, as well as the Tigerberg, Klipfontein hospitals. What are the reasons for rescheduling? And when are we expecting these projects, DG, to resume? Because I think these are the projects that our people are looking forward to. And on fiscal strategy, in the 2025 budget, the government fiscal framework has committed to allocate a 0.8% increase in real terms of non-interest expenditure. But the MTBPS has significantly reduced this to 0.2, resulting in a decline in the medium term by a total of 20.4 billion in 27-28. As Honorable Mautwe has indicated, for me, this is a counter direction from the 2025 budget, which the minister argued it was not an austerity budget. The MTBPS fiscal strategy is about austerity. So, Chair, what measures will the National Treasury take to close the existing budgetary constraints impacting the effective implementation of mandates by the Department of Education, Health, Police, Defense, and other government entities with significant backlogs, such as Stats SA? My second question would be on the fiscal strategy and economic growth, noting that the macroeconomic policy projections of gross fixed capital formation are expected to increase in the medium term. What are the variables driving the assumption of its growth, as the GFCF has declined in the previous quarter, and the fiscal strategy is geared to lowering the public investment economy? On inflation, Chair, which will be my last question for this round, I guess, noting that the National Treasury is supporting a 3% inflation target with a 1% point tolerance spent to achieve price stability and lower inflation, how will this measure significantly contribute to tackling unemployment and stimulate economic growth, which I think are the priorities of this government? Can the National Treasury commit to a process to review the overall mandate of the South African Reserve Bank to ensure its policy decision take unemployment and balance growth into consideration as an anchor tenet of a balance of the effect of the monetary policy transmission decisions? I still have more questions, Chair, but let me give an opportunity to other colleagues for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Kalega Mazibuko, for demonstrating high discipline. May I then recognize Honorable Burke?
Chair, it seems to me that if we speak quickly, we might get more questions in. So I'm going to ask the colleagues to take rapid fire notes. The first question is on TARS. We talk a lot about identifying programs with TARS, but we don't specifically mention agencies. So could I understand whether agencies are excluded from TARS scrutiny? And then we understand it's a collaborative project between Treasury and departments. And I think this is a great first step, but we have some concerns. For instance, when we ask departments to identify programs, are we not then depending on departments who might not have sufficient capacity? And do we have the certainty that they will have the political will to identify programs that need to be phased out? And if the answer to that question is yes, do we also think that turkeys would vote for Christmas? On infrastructure, I've looked a bit at the ecosystem, and it seems to me that we have the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Council, the Infrastructure Fund, the Infrastructure Fund Advisory Committee, the Budget Facility for Infrastructure, the Infrastructure Finance and Implementation Support Agency, a Credit Guarantee Vehicle, the Department of Transport's Public Sector Participation Unit, and the Water Partnership Office, as well as the Green Climate Fund. And on top of that, we have the DBSA, we have National Treasury, the DPWI, and the Presidency are all involved in infrastructure. So my question then is, how many public-private partnerships are in the execution phase at the moment? And do we have units and groupings dealing with infrastructure that exceed the number of actual PPPs currently under construction? On ghost workers, am I correct in understanding that the audit is taking place at the national and provincial departmental level? Does it include state entities? And are there solid plans with deadlines to also expand the ghost audit to local government? The budget documentation mentions that the Education Labour Relations Council is auditing ghost teachers. Why is this ghost audit separate from the main ghost audits? And if it is separate, are there any other carve-outs? When can we expect results from this teacher audit? And are the deadlines the same as the main audit? I'm going to skip over an early retirement program question, but I might submit it to Treasury in writing. On the tax income side, we see Treasury is predicting higher VAT revenue compared to the May budget. And you would think then if people are spending more, it's because they're earning more, but personal income tax receipts are unchanged. So I just want to understand, is this because people are not earning more, they're just increasing spending on consumption rather than servicing debt or saving? Or is it that people are drawing down on retirement via the two-pot and then spending? On tax revenue and bracket creep, I'd like to understand what the progress is on the revenue collection project. And could I understand from the Minister if we've got sufficient compliance and revenue is collected, will this be used to ensure that we're able to provide bracket creep relief? Just 2.5 more questions, Chair. On the Department of Defence, I see the budget there is increased by 1.2 billion rand that's going towards the Department of Defence's Special Defence account. And could the Minister, as far as the law enables him to do, unpack this transaction a bit more for us? Minister, I also want to understand debt guarantees. It's up to in the PFMA, it's up to your discretion to approve or reject requests for debt guarantees. And there are no limits on the size of debt guarantees that the Finance Minister, less scrupulous than yourself, could potentially issue. Is our understanding correct that this is the case? And do you think it creates a bit of a long-term risk to our country and our fiscus, especially if the person who comes after you is a bit more radically minded than yourself and the DA? And on that note of defense and debt guarantees, on Denel, the budget document states that Denel has not submitted audited annual financial statements for 4 years. Yet it's been recapitalized with 3.4 billion rand, of which 914 million was placed into an escrow account. Despite reported progress on the execution of its turnaround plan, the entity now lacks working capital. Consequently, government granted Denel access to the remaining recapitalization funds and provided 660 million rand in guarantees to support project execution. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. Are you saying National Treasury gave a company that hasn't published annual financial audits for 4 years access to almost 1 billion rand more, and then also a 660 million rand guarantee? I'll leave it there for now, Terry.
Thank you. With a few seconds to spare, Honorable Wakeland.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Minister, Honorable Deputy Minister, DG and Commissioner. Thank you very much for the concise presentation. I'm going to ask 3 questions and I'll be done. Somebody else can use the rest of the time. The problem we sit with currently, that there's a number of big ticket factors that affect the 3% inflation target. It's not just the matters that we spoke about, but there's a few other matters I would like to just put on the table and you have an understanding. The first one, and we spoke a lot about Eskom and the load shedding and the grid upgrade and the triple Ps and so on. My concern lies more on the expenditure side and the pass-through cost to consumers, in particular municipalities and municipalities to users, and the impact of that it will have on the CPI. Because my concern lies in that is not just the electricity, but also the administrative cost prices, the municipal charges and the likes. There's a range of expenditures that is currently lying with consumers, and I think you get the gist of my question, is how do we consider that to ensure that we stick with the 3% inflation? That's the first thing. Then the second question, DG, is the matter around, and one of the big structural reform issues is a matter of effectiveness and performance of HR, just in general as a question. There's currently, and I looked at the line item, which was called, what's it called, progressive payment every year, irrespective of their 13th check. There's progressive payments happening irrespective of people's performance, if they work or don't work. My concern lies in that, that cost is massive. I've looked at it, and my question to you is, how do we ensure that departments will actually start complying with performance targets and implementing performance targets, and the impact that would have on the CPI and your impact on your, to stick to the 3% inflation? Then the last one is the matter around public, and it's more about the procurement, and I'm very happy to see that we have implemented the e-procurement system now, and we are able to track some matters. I want to take you a little bit back to the Zondo Commission. In 2017, one of your officials suggested that 50% of the annual, at that stage, it was 800 billion procurement bill, was lost due to intentional abuse of the system. Now, I think we know, I think it's, if I quickly had looks around over 1.2 trillion for this financial year, 1.3 trillion. What is that impact currently as far as the abuse of the system is concerned? And I know there's some indication that you are trying to stop that abuse, but where are we now? We haven't seen figures, and if we have to measure it now, what is it? Is it still at 50%? Where are we? Additional to that is a second part, is that we know that procurement come at the premium price for government, and the guesstimated cost is around about 30 or 40% premium price that we pay. How are we going to fix that in going forward, and the impact that would have on the CPI? The third part to that question, Chair, is the matter of the very same senior person said that on a current procurement bill, on a 90-10 prevention point system, 11% is given away for BEE. And under the 80-20, it's 25%. So already that has been factored into your costing to say that 11%, and we are happy to pay that premium price as far as you're concerned, to obviously to do the transformation as we wanted to see. My question to you is, what impact does the BEE currently have on the inflation rate target, and by how much does the BEE premium will affect the CPI going forward? Should we not, and I understand that the Deputy President have spoken about a possible some changes, and if you could tell us what, where, will that have an impact on your inflation rate? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Wakelin, to the Honorable Member there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honorable Minister and Honorable Deputy Minister, good morning. I have 4 questions. My first one relates to the South African Customs Union. Now, South Africa is still making very large payments in terms of the South African Customs Union, and especially the revenue share formula, larger than what may be deemed equitable due to a formula that does not make much sense anymore. Are there any negotiations with our SACO partners, as I previously proposed, and what impact will the newly established African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement have on the SACO agreement vis-a-vis revenue generated versus payments made, since aspects of these two agreements seems to be overlapping and much of the benefits of SACO being absorbed by the African Continental Free Trade Area, and the revision of the SACO agreement can save billions. Now, my next 3 questions come from a select committee point of view. First, as bearing on the municipal equitable share reform. Now, given that 9.7% will go to municipalities, yet 169 municipalities remain in financial distress, what mechanisms will be implemented to ensure that increased equitable share allocations actually translate into improved service delivery outcomes in capacity-weak municipalities? And what will Treasury accelerate the update cycle of census-based equitable share formula to reflect rapid urban migration and other demographic shifts? Secondly, on conditional grants overall, when will the next phase of performance-based conditional grants be rolled out, especially for failing municipalities? And what specific reforms are being introduced to prevent fruitless and wasteful expenditure, strengthen supply chain and project management, and ensure timely completion of infrastructure projects. These are aspects that we see on a very regular basis when we go on oversight to especially incomplete projects. And lastly, on municipal debt, with municipal arrears to Eskom and water boards now threatening the stability of the entire intergovernmental fiscal system, what reforms will Treasury implement to curb the ballooning of these municipal debt? So with those few words, thank you, Mr. Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I think it's Honourable Ryder.
Thank you very much, Chairpersons. And thanks for the opportunity. Nice to see the Minister, Deputy Minister, and all of the officials and be able to stare into each other's eyeballs. So we do appreciate that. Honourable Brits took the sexy questions. So I have merely one question I want to ask, and it relates to the move to deal with expenditure that is wasteful and trying to make sure that government spending is constrained. Now, as the select committees, we recently did some oversight on spending on infrastructural projects using conditional grant funding. Some of the projects that we've found have been running for longer than generations has been running as a soap opera on TV. And what happens is every time the project is due for completion, you have a contractor absconding or something goes wrong. The reality is you find yourself 60, 70% of the way through completion of the project. And of course, to walk away from a half-completed project, leaving a white elephant is unconscionable. So, we're compelled to throw more money at the problem. But if you look at the profit yield on a construction project, it always follows a bell curve. So then to bring in a new contractor at the end of the project, of course, you need to put incentives in. That's where your costs start ballooning. And realistically, I mean, we've seen projects that have been carrying on for 15 years plus without completion. Of course, the control over these conditional grants is largely left up to the domicile department, the national department up top there. But what is Treasury doing in order to make sure that these never-ending projects actually get pulled together? And is there kind of a project team that can be identified and put together on the worst of these projects in order to go and ensure completion? Because otherwise it just becomes a never-ending drain on the limited resources that Mr. Kieswetter and his crew have done such a good job of putting in together. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Ryder. I recognize you, Honourable Member there. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to everybody. And it is great to see you all in the same room and able to go through some of the interventions that we saw earlier this week. My question is around the PPP regulations. Minister, you've stated that there will be municipal PPP regulations that will be finalized by 2026. However, Treasury has been promising finalized PPPs reforms since 2024 MTBPS, and we're yet to see these regulations finalized. Given metros like Johannesburg who desperately need private investment, will you commit to publishing the draft regulations by the end of the first quarter of 2026 for parliamentary scrutinization? Staying with local, Minister, you announced MIG reforms where persistently failing municipalities will be shifted into agencies like MISA and DBSA. How many municipalities are currently persistently failing in this category, and what determines these criteria for failure, and what implications will be put in the future to prevent this from happening? I mean, our locals it's eye-wateringly terrible what's happening in local municipalities at the moment. Then with regards to TARS, which is a welcome program to see, and we are hopeful for the results that it will be churning out. We see that there's already been a 6.7 billion rand potential savings over the next 3 years. This is across, 18 departments or so. We've long been talking about wasteful spending, SOE inefficiencies, ghost employees, that we see tens of billions annually get wasted. What is your commitment to getting 100% review of these programs done within the next budgetary deadline? Then there was an announcement of the scaling down of the public transport network grant because it failed to meet the objectives. And it cited that there are many failed programs currently, and much like my colleague, Honorable Ryder has just mentioned, what is being put in place to prevent this wastage of grants in the future? We see millions, billions being returned to Treasury on unspent grants. These projects don't deliver results, yet they are critical for service delivery. What interventions are going to be put in place? And will there be consequence management for officials who fail to meet their obligations in actually delivering these projects? Minister, you announced that the Durban Pier 2, which is welcoming private operators, will unlock 200 billion rand of investment over the next 5 years. This is exciting news for the private sector in infrastructure. However, will you be able to replicate this model across other ports, railway corridors, water infrastructures? And what regulations and policies have been put in place to address and to possibly scale up the success? And then my last question is around illicit trade. So we welcome we see that the illicit trade losses to SARS and to our revenue is estimated to be over 40 billion in tobacco alone. There's also losses that we're seeing in fuel and the alcohol trade. So the cracking down of illicit trade is important, but in the same breath, is there any possibility or is it feasible to provide stability or predictable tax and excise taxes to the industry that are potentially looking at investment in the future? Are they able to provide them with some kind of certainty of what the following years will bring, whether it be linked to inflation, or is it, please listen to the minister's speech in February to find out what the excise tax increase will be? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The Honorable Member, I can't see you from here, so Honorable Member, you are recognized, Baba. Oh, Honorable Khateb, ngiyabonga Nkosi yami.
Thank you so much, Honorable Chairperson. You will catch me when I overstep the allocated time. I've got quite a few questions. The first one is that the government notes progress on reforms in electricity, transport, and water. However, several of the reforms, including ESCOM and Transnet restructuring, are acknowledged as delayed. What risk mitigation plan exists for SOE's performance failures? And how will the government ensure that these delays do not hinder the macroeconomic and infra reform agenda? The second question, given the continued strain on households, how does Treasury assess the impact of the revised inflation estimates on real incomes and living standards, and what policy levers in the MTBPS are intended to alleviate these pressures? My next question is, MTBPS acknowledges that weak financial management, arrears, and subnational liabilities remain major risks. What reforms or enforcement mechanisms will accompany the increased provincial and local government allocations to ensure that these funds translate into improved service delivery rather than deepening arrears, waste, or irregular expenditure? My last question, Chair. The medium-term budget policy statement outlines measures for fiscal consolidation. However, does Treasury plan to balance these efforts with the need to protect essential social and economic programs? I thank you.
Umhlonishwa usenesikhathi but siyabonga. Eh, Let me recognize Honorable Wesley on the platform.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. May I be allowed to keep my camera off so that I can have a better quality of signal?
You can, Honorable Wesley, you can proceed.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. The MK Party approaches this 2025 MTBPS not as a technical document, but as a political signal of where the DA and ANC-led GNU intends to take our country over the next 4 years. And it's more of the same, maintaining the status quo of the last 30 years and decline of the past 7 years under this current administration that's led us into exponential economic decline, increased poverty, and the highest unemployment rate in the world. What we see in the MTBPS statement is not a plan for growth, not a plan for jobs, not a plan for development, but a plan for managed decline and increased dependency on Western finance institutions like the World Bank and IMF that makes us subject to their conditionalities, which work against the sovereign interest of the South African people. This is not a political statement by MKP. This is what the numbers say. The minister's MTBPS presentation failed to focus on how to solve unemployment, poverty, inequality, and does not prioritize the land reform and restitution question, or unpack how to implement or save the NDP, or even how the MTDP targets can be achieved. These are not mere ambitions. These are confessions of a government that has surrendered on the economic battlefield in the fight against poverty in favor of personal enrichment and wealth generation for the elite and white monopoly capital, and maintains capitalist oppression of our people, maintaining apartheid era and colonial ownership patterns of the economy. We are told this is a prudent and responsible budget, but responsible to who? Prudent for who? Is it prudent for the unemployed youth, 72.4% of whom are abandoned by this GNU budget and midterm budget policy statement? No, this isn't their budget. Is this a prudent and responsible budget for the 12.7 million jobless South Africans waking up today not knowing how they're going to house, clothe, educate, or feed their families, or pay for water and electricity, or whether there will ever be a job available for them in the future? Is this a responsible budget for the African, Aboriginal, and Indigenous people and colored and Indian women who's Indian and whose unemployment is now at 51.7% as Black African women? No, it's not a budget for them. This budget is responsible and accountable only to rating agencies, investors, and Western financial institutions, not to the people of South Africa. Minister, if poverty, unemployment, and state capacity are truly your stated priorities, why does the GNU continue borrowing from institutions whose conditionalities explicitly require cuts to the very services like hospitals, policing, municipal functions that protect and serve the poor? And secondly, Minister, when South Africa has 392 billion rand in GFECRA and 645 billion rand in GEPF surpluses and 140 billion rand in UIF reserves, why has the GNU chosen external conditional loans like the 15.9 billion that they just loaned from the World Bank instead of using their own domestic surpluses to fund job creation, infrastructure, and service delivery without austerity? The minister calls for structural reforms, yet Operation Vulindlela, the so-called anchor of these reforms, has no measurable targets, no performance metrics, and no evidence of any impact whatsoever. It's just a talk shop. Even the PBO has confirmed this repeatedly. This is reform by slogan, not reform by substance. We are told the growth forecast is 1.2%, but like we have consistently said at MKP, they have continually revised down year on year for the past 7 years, and yet still cling to the fantasy growth rate targets of 1.2%. Chairpersons, with respect, that number is fiction. The IMF says 1.0%, PwC is 1.0%, Nedbank says 1.1%. Treasury is alone in its optimism, but a budget built on fantasy is a budget that collapses under reality. For sub-Saharan Africa, the average growth rate is 4.1%. Why are we falling so far behind the rest of Africa year on year for decades? This MTBPS continues 7 years of austerity, the longest consolidation drive in democratic South Africa. Yet debt to GDP has not come down. Why? Because you cannot cut your way out of an unemployment crisis. We have a growth problem, not a debt problem. Meanwhile, the state sits with 392 billion rand and other money that can be used to help our people. How does the minister justify real per capita spending declines across health, education, and policing while calling this budget pro-poor. Does the minister accept that raising the fuel levy is a regressive tax that disproportionately affects the poor? And why was a wealth tax not even considered? Chairpersons, the NCOP party rejects austerity by stealth, rejects the continued worship of foreign capital, and rejects the budget that protects privilege while suffocating the poor. South Africa needs a developmental state, not a fiscal custodian for bondholders. We need beneficiation at source, not extraction for foreign profit. We need land and industrialization, not spreadsheets and slogans. We need a budget
Honorable
that
Wesley.
puts work, wages, and dignity at the center, not rating agencies and regressive taxes.
Honorable
I
Wesley,
have a lot more
you
to
are
say. I
online.
understand I'm going over time. I apologize. I know,
If-
but I want to I just want to say the fact that we are brought down to 5 minutes, it's not right, especially if we each of our parties are representing millions of voters, Mr. Chair. We need proper time, and this needs to go for the whole day, not just for a few minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, honorable members, I understand your concern, but I also, we've agreed on a time. We will have to look at how we program it differently. But yes, that constraint that we have today is what we have. So let me allow Honorable Kwankwa. You are recognized.
Chairperson, I hope you are going to give me an hour. I'm kidding. Madiba and the National Treasury team and everybody concerned, I think the reforms implemented so far are gradually starting to yield some positive results for the Treasury. Yeah. And we should commend you for that. And some of the work that you have been able to do with Operation Vulindlela and so on. However, I want to focus on the primary surplus, which we are using as a fiscal anchor, for an example. The challenge we have always raised with this is that as far back as 2019, we proposed a well-enforced debt ceiling. Currently, for an example, there is no formal debt rule or ceiling enshrined in law, which is part of the challenge that you see, because as you manage your fiscal policy, that in essence becomes important. I'm sure you know this, I think it was sometime in 2024 when the IMF also recommended some kind of debt ceiling anchor together with independent monitoring body. And in the debate we made in that 2019, we said exactly that. We made a proposal along those lines, mindful of the fact that if you don't have an enforceable debt cap, the risk is that fiscal discipline may not hold when there are some political pressures that a political party faces that is in government. Like, for example, you know where those spending pressures come from: SOEs, wage bills, social spending, and so on. Linked to this is then the question around, perhaps when it comes to the fiscal anchor, the primary surplus rather, is that how you spoke about maintaining the primary surplus into the medium term, and you gave an estimate of how much would actually be raised insofar as that is concerned. I think you cited 200 billion rands, if my memory serves me well. But the question I want to ask is then, if we maintain the primary surplus, what reforms would you undertake to ensure that its durability does not end up eroding public service delivery, which is a concern of many people insofar as that is concerned? The other question, Minister, has to do, when you were talking about the benefits, for example, of inflation targeting or adopting inflation targeting, the central bank uses this very cleverly, and so does government, where the focus is on protection of real incomes and poverty reduction, right? I think even in your presentation, you mentioned what would happen to consumption expenditure and how that would help us to stimulate growth. But more importantly, a point which is less spoken about is that if you have a low inflation target, then what you are likely to do is that the central bank is likely to be aggressive in how it pursues that inflation target, right? Even when we know that in countries such as South Africa, the factors that usually cause us high inflation are exogenous factors. They are external factors. It's external shocks. It's commodity prices. It's the price of oil, Brent crude oil. it's capital flow, which is portfolio investment reversals and all of that, which is common in developing countries. Now, the concern which is valid is that as soon as that happens, then you are going to have a different high interest rate environment as they are trying to pursue the inflation target. Would like you to address that point as a way that tries to allay the fears, which are valid and legit for many people, insofar as having a low inflation target for a developing country such as South Africa. I understand the fact that it had to be brought at some point in line with some of the major trading partners, which is also very critical. I concur with Honorable Mayuta from the EFF that at one point, you said you were not going to, no, there was no inflation target which was going to be reviewed. You issued a statement when the Reserve Bank was trying to influence this debate and then said it has to be done with proper consultation. I'm not aware of any proper consultation. Perhaps the discussion is centered, has revolved or centered around many technocrats, but it has not involved, in my understanding and view, the various stakeholders that are supposed to form part of that, even before you make a decision as to whether or not the interest rate will be reduced. So that on its own is a problem. But also, if you are saying, when we look at the recovery, the revenue that you're able to generate, that you've been able to generate, some interventions would have helped us in this regard. It's a valid question that Dr. Beck asked for an example to say, would you then, National Treasury, consider changing the bracket creep as well?
Honorable Kwankwa, as you wrap up.
Yo, liphelele xesha, I mean, it's le mibuzo.
Imizuzu emihlanu chawe.
Okay, Chair. Diabulela, thank you very much.
No enkosi baba. Can I recognize Honorable Bateman on the platform?
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and good morning to you and to the Minister, to all my honourable colleagues and all of those other persons who are present here this morning. I'd like to start by firstly congratulating the Minister on making changes which lay a very positive foundation for investment, for growth, and for job creation. This is good news for the poor. It is good news for all South Africans. In particular, the reduced inflation target, the targeted and responsible savings program, and honouring the commitment still to reduce debt as a percentage of GDP. I do still have one concern, which is the fact that the ratio of tax to GDP is projected to continue growing over the medium term. And so that is something which I think we still need to look at quite closely as one of the causes of our sluggish growth. Not the only cause, but it is something within Treasury's purview. I have two questions. One is, we recently in SCOA had a presentation by NSFAS. They had a deficit this year of about 14 billion rand, which was plugged mostly from non-recurring sources of funding. And this deficit is likely to grow unless NSFAS funding criteria are reformed in some way. And I think this could be a concern for next year's budget and also social stability. And what is being done to address this structural risk and this funding deficit? And then secondly, Treasury has mooted a proposal to tax unrealized capital gains in collective investment schemes. This will undermine household savings, which are already far below where we want them to be, and it's causing major uncertainty for domestic savings and for the sector. Is the Minister or is Treasury able to provide an update on the thinking in this regard? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Honorable Bateman. Honorable Siwisa.
No, thank you, Chair, and greetings to everyone. Chair, I've got only two questions. Minister, I'm very happy that you touched on the issue of the signaling when we come to the operation of trains. A few weeks back, I went on an oversight to the train station in Kimberley, where it was alluded that there were issues raised concerning cable theft, which affects the issue of signaling, which means that locomotives or trains cannot operate properly and that is the issue that is going to affect the Transnet freight volume targets. Free State is one of the places that can be utilized as an ideal hub for rail transportation. In light of that, Minister, what accountable mechanisms are in place to ensure that Transnet meets its freight volume targets, which are essential to economic recovery? Another concern, Minister, that arises is the issue of the operation of local government, our municipalities. There is a continuous chronic infrastructure failure and maintenance backlogs that impede growth. This is due to the lack of planning and coordination amongst government agencies, amongst private sector stakeholders. There is insufficient capacity and skills within government agencies and municipalities. This can clearly be seen in the performance of municipalities for their lack of provision of service delivery. How will local government reforms address these concerns, Minister? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. I note Honorable Sukwati. I know she was is in transit. So, but they are still on the virtual platform. Can I recognize Honorable Sukwati?
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity. And let me join my colleagues in welcoming some of the progress that has been made, particularly in terms of the revenue buoyance that we have experienced from SARS. But on the same vein, just to check as to how do we then take the buoyancy to take it into the MTEP and hoping that SARS will be in a better position to continue to collect in the manner that it has. But also remembering that the allocations that have been made are not necessarily going to capacitate SARS. Some are there going to be servicing some of the debt that SARS has. So we need to really look at that to make sure that we are in a better position to continue to capacitate SARS to collect. Chair, on the prioritized the 2025 MTBPS, prioritizing spending towards capital investment, what mechanisms do exist to balance that as we shift towards capital expenditure, we do not necessarily reduce the spending on essential and basic services that the poor and the working class household depend on. Because if we do not have a proper balance there, it might actually create some challenges. Again, in terms of the new entities that we are looking at, for instance, in terms of infrastructure, SA and so on, that are being allocated funds. What kind of mechanisms are we putting in place? Are they scheduled in terms of accountability, in terms of the funding that they'll be getting? But also we are looking at other alternative entities to be able to deal with water infrastructure and so on. I would want to understand how we're going to be dealing with that, because they will be getting allocations from the national revenue. And the last one, Chair, is the certainty in terms of SARS being ready after the present leadership will be vacating. Since we know that the minister will be vacating very soon, what kind of steps are we taking to put in place to make sure that we do not necessarily have a gap, but also we continue to have the capacity that we have, that SARS have now, into the future? Because it's very clear that with the economic stagnation, we continuously going to have to resort to various mechanisms to generate revenue, but equally SARS plays a pivotal role in that regard. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. Can I allow Honorable Chairperson, if you can go, and then we'll work our way down, and then Minister, you'll have an opportunity to respond with the team.
Thanks, Dr. Maimane.
Greetings to yourself, Dr. Masangani, and Minister and Deputy Minister and Commissioner. Good morning, and honorable members and staff. Chair, I might raise questions that have been raised, but you'll pardon me because at some time I was out. Chair, the government's growth pillar include macro stability, infrastructure, reforms, and building state capability. ESCOM stability and rail reform show mixed progress, Honorable Minister. So my question is, what is the revised timelines for unbundling ESCOM into separate entities? And how are these delays affecting the credibility of the energy reform agenda? Number two, Honourable Minister, is on the Operation Vulindlela progress. That is on the slide 6 as it's been presented. The phase 2 highlights progress in visas, digital transformation, and water infrastructure, but major delays in ESCOM and Transnet infrastructure. The question there, Chair, is when will the National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency be fully operational? And what new funding model will it adopt to avoid repeat failures of existing water boards? Chair, the last one is on the Treasury project debt stability at 77.9% of the GDP and the rising primary surplus to the 2.5% by 2028-2029. Honorable Mr. Revenue performance in 19.7 billion higher. The question on that matter, Chair, is what proportion of the 19.7 billion revenue overruns is once off, and how is Treasury controlling the volatility of corporate income tax receipt? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chairperson. May I recognize Dr. Maswanganyi, who's the Chair of Finance?
Thank you, Dr. Moimon, Chairperson, and Honorable Ndlovu. Also, the Minister, Deputy Minister, Sarupen, colleagues, and support teams from Parliament and Treasury and SARS Commissioner. Let me first acknowledge progress so that it should not be like there's no progress. South Africa is out of the grey list. And some of us in the last term, we spent sleepless nights with the General Laws Amendment Bill, amending so many bills in one bill. This Parliament contributed a lot to get the grey list right out of the picture. And South Africa is no longer there. And also give credit to Treasury, FIC, and the law enforcement agencies and everybody. Also give credit to the Minister for Intervention on Itala. You remember we went to Itala Bank when the people of KwaZulu-Natal came here and said, Parliament, can you intervene? We went to Durban. I think the minister with his provincial counterpart will have to strengthen that board and the executive so that we get the Itala back on track. We are not going to deal with issues of the board where we don't appoint boards. But something has to be done in that regard. There are some SOEs which have picked up because every time when we have MTBPS and budget, we'll cry about bailouts. ESCOM has turned the corner and it's one of the biggest SOEs. You can't have an economy or life without ESCOM in this country. And we have seen positive developments in ESCOM, despite challenges there and there. We are left with load reduction there and there. DBSA 2 weeks back came here and reported what they are doing. They are doing a good job. We emphasize to them that they must do more to empower women in construction and youth. The problem of unemployment affects youth and women. And DBSA is not that strong in that regard. But they are doing well. The same with AXA and PIC. There's a province called Limpopo, where I come from. The economy is growing at 0.9%, above the national average. It's a fact. So it's almost 1%. So we can't sit here and not acknowledge when there is a government in the northern part of this country working very hard to be above a national average by almost 0.4. 2 weeks back, they had the investor conference, and I hope the national government is supporting them in that regard. It will reduce young people leaving that province to Johannesburg and Gauteng in general. Gauteng is experiencing economic and social problems, challenges as a result of people leaving Limpopo and surrounding provinces to Gauteng because of prospects for employment, studies, and others. So I think we can learn from what Limpopo is doing and replicate it even in other provinces so that we are able to reach the 1.5 or so percent that we are talking about. And the issue of reduction of debt service, if you remember, in all our discussions, we have been calling for a debt reduction strategy or debt management strategy, whatever we call it. Look at all our resolutions of the fiscal framework report. It's about that. Honorable Sarupen will remember when he was a member of that committee in the last term, the issue of the debt was high. And the minister has reported that 25, 26, that is beginning to be under serious management. And the higher than expected revenue collection, let's welcome it. It's not just from nowhere, but it's because of the investment that we are making into SARS. I know Honorable Beasley, once he starts talking about SARS, you won't stop him. He likes SARS a lot. Thanks. So lastly, Minister, the logistics is not doing well. Monday, Friday, I'm on the N1. It's just trucks. Where is the strategy of road to rail and logistics in general? What's going to happen to trucks? Does it mean all national roads will be taken over by the trucks and no more goods train and stuff? Talk about the logistics sector. We have invested a lot there in Transnet, but we don't see tangible results. If you have them, please share them with us. Thanks very much, Dr. Mengo and colleagues.
Thank you, Chairperson. There are many questions here, but I'll try and be brief and disciplined. Now you are taking my time also. Let's work together. Minister, I want to say, firstly, I think that medium-term budget policy statement is a reflection of great intent and is a welcomed in the difficulties that you're dealing with a government where in some departments there are some genuine challenges. And I think, let me begin with the inflation targeting and the adjustment to monetary policy. You are taking a 3% position consistent with the SARB. Now, internationally, I will welcome the notion that says that there's been a suppression of inflation. But I think it is fair enough to say, for the purposes of South Africa, much of our inflation is driven by supply side rather than demand side economics. So how do we deal with this question for households on administered prices where there's some electricity hikes coming, there's some fuel hikes that drive up inflation naturally? How do we cushion the consumer from potential interest rate rising in a developing economy such as ours, given the research that looks at Africa around this very conversation of inflation targeting and 3%? I would argue the second question, which is that I think someone asked the question earlier on today, Minister, that whilst I appreciate the audit on ghost workers, et cetera, these are important things, and I'm cautious about saying you can audit the people that are double dipping on social grants. I think our key problem sits in some of the agencies that we've got. And so how much work has been done in rationalizing agency seaters? Because I think that is more the realizable savings. So people who are double dipping on social grants, that matter is now a subject of court. And you can see quite clearly what it's done in that regard. I also, along with many other colleagues, note the question that's been put forward. I know it should technically go to the presidency about the succession debate, or the succession, not the debate, but the question about who succeeds the SARS commissioner. But I'd like for the SARS commissioner to talk about what factors have led to the over-collection. I know there was an indicator on some of the VAT collections, but has the tech investment, what are some of the initiatives? Because if we can do more of that, I would argue we could realize more. And maybe to the SARS commissioner, you can maybe give your thoughts on the relationship between the overperformance by the JSE relative to GDP performance. That as a question of interest, because the JSE is exceeding expectations, yet it isn't related in GDP growth, and certainly in the PBO's report, it speaks about cash reserves that sit within some of those companies. What is the proportion there? Minister, and I think maybe we should talk about this. The debate, I omitted to raise it earlier on when I was speaking about inflation targeting, is the question of affordability. I think it's a global question. Citizens and households are starting to feel like at the end of the money, there's still more month left. And it would be unfair of us to speak in economic terms and forget that for many households, they're running out of money. And so maybe this is a tax question, this is another conversation. The last 2 points I want to raise is perhaps maybe on the provincial capacity to be built on local government to maximize the BFI windows. It's one thing to increase them, it's quite another for them to have capability to attract those. And it's true for provinces. You have raised a potential increase to about 9.7% allocation. I would counter a view that says that part of the problem at local government is that the debt scenario at Eskom is exacerbated by local government's capacity to service its own debts as it relates to Eskom. And so I'm worried that I want to hear your thinking around saying, fair enough, let's increase the proportion, which I agree with, because I think municipalities are not able to raise the 90%, which is part of the white paper conversation. But if we're doing that against a backdrop where some municipalities are not only servicing their debts to Eskom or being able to sell bulk energy, where do we go? And then you raise nothing about crime. Can we talk about crime in South Africa? I think citizens are suffering. Can we have a can we look at appropriation towards policing? And then in closing, I want to agree with the infrastructure drive that we're putting forward. But again, I think it relates to where local government is at. Municipalities have no capability often of building or maintaining or protecting appropriate infrastructure. So I think it's an important question for all of us to think about. But as you think through that in the medium term, what are your thoughts and what are your indications? Let me leave it at that. And Minister, allow you and the team to be able to respond, noting honorable member from the EFF's concern that you on the allocated time, you had 45 minutes the other day, 30 minutes, I don't want to be in trouble with the honorable members there. So if Minister, let's keep going with the responses and see how well we do for time. Now I'm making procedural points. Ow. Let's go, honorable Minister.
I will need your support. I'm going to ask the DG and the Commissioner in that order. The DG take it with his team and the Commissioner with his team. They are not necessarily the people who are good on time. That's why I'm saying I'm going to need your support. If you, both of them, I'm going to need your support to be able to say to them, here's your time allocation, DG, here's your time allocation, Commission, and thereafter, the DM and myself will come in. Otherwise, you are going to put pressure on us now because you have allowed them more. So the DG and the Commissioner and then the DM and myself.
I understand that, Minister, but I think some of the questions can be clustered accordingly. They don't need to be responded to individually, otherwise we'll be here all day. And then I think if members can try and keep an indicator close to about 10 minutes or so, then we can go, because we still have a deadline of trying to get towards 1 o'clock. And if there are any additional questions of clarity, I want to allow members to do that. So I understand the pressure I'm putting you under, but it is the nature of the beast, given that there's still more work to be done in committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We can certainly, I think I counted more than 50 questions, but we can certainly cluster as many of them as possible in terms of how we respond. On my side, I'll deal with a few and then I'll ask the teams to come in. The one on the S&P upgrade or maintenance of the current decision, I think you asked it as an upgrade. That information is unfortunately embargoed until after the market closes later today, when S&P will release their statement. So we are unfortunately not able to comment on what S&P may decide to do. In terms of the fiscal literacy campaign, the campaign is in the design phase. We certainly can share more detail. From a costing perspective, this is being covered within the budgets of the Treasury and some of the entities that we will work with, such as GTAC. So we'll manage the cost from that perspective. And certainly once we have a better idea of the design elements, we can certainly come back to Parliament. We do plan on rolling out, as we said, at the beginning of the next financial year. So from April next year onwards. Touching on TARs, are agencies excluded? No, they are not. What we've announced what the ministers announced in this MTBPS is really just the first work coming out of the last few months. There's a lot of additional work underway, including on entities. And as that work is concluded, we will come back. We are working with departments, but we are not relying on them to guide us on program closures and so on exclusively. So there should not be a concern about potential conflict of interest that may arise there. In terms of PPPs in execution phase, we can share the list. There are different elements to that phase: approval, procurement, the bid process, and so on. We can get back with a written list of what's in there so that we can share with you the updated information. I can give you a flavor of what's in there at the moment. There is the work on the border posts with the Border Management Agency. There are some green building projects with DPWI. There are some other DPWI infrastructure-related projects, but we can certainly share the list. On ghost workers, at the moment, the ghost worker audit only covers those institutions that are covered by Fiscal. So that's mainly national and provincial government departments. So it excludes state-owned entities, state-owned companies and local government. But as we advance in this work, the intention is very much to extend the scope. There is a specific bit of work being done in basic education, but we are collaborating with them because we're taking very much a data-driven approach using the data in Fiscal, SARS, anonymized tax data, and the National Population Register, and they are taking a approach that relies on in-person verification, but we are collaborating with them. On pay progression, there are quite a number of recommendations that came out of the DPSA's personnel expenditure review, including on pay progression, but also on other issues that inflate the wage bill, occupational specific dispensation, rural allowances, and so on. And those are all part of the TARS process in terms of identifying additional savings. And as we provide updates, we can certainly do that. We do not have a latest estimate of the of procurement abuse, but that's work that we can look into. I think the most important value of the procurement dashboard is that it sheds a lot of light on actually where the potential for abuse is and allows citizens, parliamentarians, and everyone else to have a look at that data. We have asked the team to have a sort of a training session with those who are interested in understanding a bit more how the dashboard works, and we'll certainly encourage all the MPs as well to go into those dashboards and have a look at those detailed transactions, provincial departments, national departments, entities, all the information is there, and it's very rich in the detail that's included. In terms of price premiums paid by government, we are, as part of the broader TARS process, looking at better use of transversal contracts, including in provinces where we don't have enough transversal contracts at the moment for those big ticket provincial spending items, particularly in health and education, and that will also assist from a price premium point of view. Final 2 points from my side, and then I'll hand over to the team. What we've discovered is very poor spending outcomes on conditional grants, which are mainly for infrastructure. And so we've asked our GTAC colleagues to start the first, and they've been working on it for a few months, the last month or two, the first comprehensive review of all the conditional grants. And that would cover essentially the entire conditional grant infrastructure ecosystem. And that, I think, will give us a lot of very good detailed insights into what works, what doesn't work, what should be scaled down, what should be closed, and what should be accelerated and supported and enhanced. And so as soon as that work is concluded, we can come back. Final point on municipal PPPs. We did indicate that we would have wanted to finalize the review of the municipal PPP regulations by June this year. Unfortunately, on our side, we didn't anticipate the complexity of the engagements that go into that revision. The national PPP regulations were a lot easier to update because they didn't have a layer of additional consultation that is embedded in changing the municipal PPP landscape. So we've given a commitment to the minister that by the time the budget is tabled in February, that work will be done. And we've said to the team, if there's any additional resources they need, we will make those available so that that work is done, because that is very critical to municipal service delivery. I'll stop there, Chair, and ask the teams to come in and try and cluster as many of the questions as they can, starting with economic policy and international cooperation, Boypuso, to deal with the questions relating to forecasts, investment assumptions, and so on. And then we'll call on the other colleagues to take it from there. Thank you.
Apologies. Thank you, DG. Thank you, chairs, honorable members. We received quite a few questions, which I will cluster into three broad categories, and we'll try to do so succinctly in the interest of time. So let me start with the first category of questions in relation to our growth projections. And I think that the direct question is whether or not it's time for us to give up on projecting growth. In brief, no, given its centrality to building the macro fiscal framework, and to remind honorable members the importance of the macro projections to building the picture that informs the planning for the fiscal envelope, not just in the near term, but also over the medium term. With mentioning again, which we've spoken to the committee and committees and honorable members about over time, is the accuracy of our forecasts over time. We have seen that our forecasts over time have exhibited fairly little forecast error, certainly in year in relation to competitors, and are at least as good as other projectors over the medium term, suggesting that one, we don't have particularly large forecast errors, but also that we don't have particularly large biases, either to the up or the downside, which gives us some standing and some comfort that we are using the right processes, tools, and are training and using the right or have staff of the right quality to run these models and help us get this sense of where the macroeconomy is going, even in the very uncertain environment that we find ourselves in, both globally and domestically. We were also asked the foundations on which we base these macroeconomic projections, and I would direct honorable members to Chapter 2 of the MTBPS overview or budget review. Specifically, you can find the exact assumptions that underpin our forecast topologies on table 2.3, page 15, to give you a more detailed look. We also provide a narrative that supports the outlook, so you can get a much more comprehensive picture of what we've considered in terms of our near-term and medium-term projections in crafting these frameworks. Another very helpful and important question was whether or not we've considered why it is that gross fixed capital formation or investment is low and remains low in the South African economy. In brief, yes, we do, and have done for quite some time. We have been concerned, much like many other forecasters, about low investment in the economy, not just because of what it means in the near term, but also what it means for our potential growth. Some of the things that point us in the direction of what might be driving this relate to, one, the ease, the cost of doing business in the South African economy. They relate to confidence by investors in the economy, and they relate to the structural constraints that affect people's views of South Africa as an attractive destination for making the kinds of investments that would be fixed. And this is predominantly from a private sector perspective. This matters because the private sector accounts for about 2/3 of overall investment in the South African economy, so this matters. Beyond this, there are other constraints that we've spoken to and also articulate in the documentation in terms of some of the infrastructure pipeline related to reforms in energy in particular. We speak to some of these constraints, but also speak to how they've then found expression in the view or in our view of the pipeline of investment over the medium term. So our sense of it is that some investments effectively have been delayed and are likely to come back in over the medium term. And I think this then relates to another question that we were asked in terms of, where we find the confidence in terms of the projections in relation to gross fixed capital formation or investment. Beyond this, and I think equally importantly, and this also relates to a different question that I'll come into my next cluster on regarding growth, the growth outlook, and whether or not we feel that it is adequate. Equally importantly, our view is that despite some of these changes in what we're thinking about the gross fixed capital formation outlook, the domestic demand outlook, and subsequently the growth outlook, it's important to do more.
We are under no illusions that our current growth trajectories are lower than required to meet our socioeconomic objectives, and subsequently, it's critically important that we implement these 4 pillars of growth that we've spoken to at previous committee meetings, but also have articulated to quite some detail in the book, and indicate and provide some illustration of what we think implementing these interventions could mean for the growth outlook by way of scenarios, also available in Chapter 2, where we give a sense of what the RAND or the real growth materialization could be if we are able to implement these reforms. Related to this will be the second bucket, with your permission, chairs, of questions that we've received. We received quite a few questions in relation to progress on the reform agenda, some areas where we are seeing delay, and what the mitigating or the interventions will be to try and unblock some of these challenges. And in brief, and in the interest of time, I will, with your permission, chairs, direct honorable members to 2 pieces of documentation. Again, Chapter 2 of the MTBPS overview, but a fortnight ago, we released the second quarter update of the second phase of Operation Vulindlela to give a sense of in quite some detail of some of the reforms implementation that we've seen, some of the momentum around there, some of the bottlenecks, and what is currently being done in quite some detail to address those. So if honorable members could please refer to those 2 documents. I will not read them at the moment in the interest of time, but please do be assured that they are there. If anything remains unanswered or outstanding, we are happy to respond in writing to provide that detail. Some questions in relation to the inflation target. Some were directed specifically to the minister, and I'm sure he'll be happy to take those on the consultation side. But there were 1 or 2 that spoke to some elements of our consideration in that regard. One of them was in relation to growth fundamentally, the relationship between high interest rates and a shift in the target. The first is to say what we find is that there tends to be a correlation between the nominal interest rate and inflation. We are seeing and we find ourselves in a low inflation environment, which is in part why the timing of this change was appropriate, because the view is to lock in some of those gains associated with the current low inflation environment. So subsequently, you wouldn't necessarily need a lot of aggressive policy action from the central bank to get inflation closer to the target, because it is already trending there and has been for some time now. In addition to that, we also note that inflation expectations are adjusting. They're adjusting downwards. And this, of course, had also started to ramp up in the wake of the central bank indicating their preference to target the lower part of the band. This policy step that we've taken now provides a lot more clarity and addresses any uncertainties that there might be with regard to the target itself at 3% with this tolerance band that, of course, allows for shocks and allows for, as the authorities would say, monetary policy to see through shocks when they present themselves, to ensure that the economy generally operates in this lower inflationary environment with more stability. And that is sort of the flexibility that the tolerance band around the 3% provides. So effectively, in the context of these things happening collectively, we don't necessarily see that we would need to see a lot of aggressive policy action by our analysis. But of course, that remains the remit of the bank as they operate independently to meet the target. And I'm sure that the governor in his following MPC statements would provide further color as they go about implementing monetary policy within the framework set out by the minister in his MTBPS statement and speech earlier this week. I think those were the main ones. I suppose the only other thing worth mentioning is from a real growth perspective, because a question was asked regarding real demand. Effectively, what as the DG had indicated and from what was presented in the presentation earlier, what we're finding and what our modeling has shown over time is that while our view was that a change to the inflation target would result in a shift downwards to consumption and subsequently to GDP in the very near term, we found that real consumption expenditure subsequently adjusted quite quickly, and we could see real gains in consumption expenditure over the medium term and going into the long run, which in fact does provide, from a real perspective, a boost to what rands are able to buy. And subsequently, we are seeing stronger real household consumption expenditure over the medium term, which supports real domestic demand and subsequently our real growth outlook over the medium term. Of course, these gains are compounding over the long term, and that is also part of what informed our view on the change to the target. I think that covers the bulk of the questions from my side. If there is anything else that I've missed, DG, we can maybe come back later, but I think that covers it. Thank you.
Thank you, Boipuso. The ministers asked me to ask the colleagues to see if they can shorten the responses on our side. It is always a challenge given the number of questions that we've been asked, but we'll try and keep it as brief as possible. Chris, do you want to come in on one or two of the tax issues, bearing in mind that obviously the commissioner will come in as well? Chris?
Thanks, DG. Honourable Chairs, honourable members, thank you. A couple of questions on tax. There were a few to the Commissioner on the 20 billion and the performance of the tax, the debt collection, so I won't talk to those. On the higher VAT revenue, we really just see this from higher consumption. We're not quite sure why PIT receipts are the same. The two-part revenues are a little bit lower than we had expected. But there hasn't been this increase in PIT to explain that consumption, so we'll still have to look at it. On the bracket creep issue, we've assumed that there is full bracket creep relief in the assumptions going forward. So if there is sufficient revenue that we don't need to increase taxes, then there would be full bracket creep relief in those years. On excise duties, I think it's still important to talk about all of these issues before we get to budget. So we're happy to hear those concerns. We've noted a lot of them in terms of illicit trade. We started workshops with the alcohol industry on adjusting that regime. We've listened to a lot of the companies on the concerns, especially from the BMA as well, on the scourge of illicit tobacco. So that is what we do consider when we make inputs to the minister before the budget. But obviously we can't say what we're going to do. The tax to GDP ratio, that's also noted there. It's because of that additional 20 billion that's penciled in that it goes quite high. But also SARS have been doing a very good job and they've been collecting more than what we've expected compared to economic performance, which has been pushing that buoyancy up, which then pushes the tax to GDP ratio up. And I don't think it's a bad thing if the tax to GDP ratio goes up without any increases in rates, just because SARS are being more effective. It's more resources given your growth. On the collective investment schemes, we held a workshop with industry earlier in the year, and we've listened to their concerns. We are revising a response document where we're going to have alternative proposals that we will put forward. We hope to do that either before budget or at budget, and then we can continue the discussion. The proportion that is once off, Honourable Chair, so we've only assumed 2 billion of the 19.7 billion is once off, and that was because there were some dividends tax payments from some transactions that we don't think would repeat, so it's only 2 of the 19.7. I think that covers everything from us. Thanks, DG.
Thank you, Chris. Ravesh, do you want to touch on, I think, Denel is maybe the most important issue there, and then we can move on to the other colleagues.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Honourable Chair. I think there was a question on Denel around the financial sustainability and the financial statements. So since, in fact, in the last day or two, since we've tabled MTBPS, we've learned that the issues around the financial statements have been addressed by Denel. In fact, they are having their AGM on the 27th of November. And that should be then finalized in terms of the financial being finalized and actually being put out to Parliament and to the public. I think your question on Oman in terms of the guarantee. So the Minister of Finance did concur to the guarantee on the 18th of July. However, it's important to point out that they haven't drawn down yet on that guarantee. In fact, they should be drawing down within the next week or two. Oman. No, it's, so in terms of the guarantee, it's not physical money. They are going to a lender to draw down those funds, which will be government guaranteed.
Thanks, Ravesh. We'll now move to Ulrika from Public Finance on the spending-related questions. Ulrika?
Thank you, Honorable Chairs, Honorable Members. DG, you've answered a lot of it on the reforms around expenditure. I think there's only 3 specific to entities. The first is on the Road Accident Fund, and the Road Accident Fund is not a fully funded system. It's a pay-as-you-go system. And a large share of the liabilities, that 500 billion that Honorable Beasley referred to, is an actuarial assessment of future claims that will still come. So there are 3 categories of liabilities in the Road Accident Fund. The one that we're most concerned would be, given the cash nature of the business, would be the claims that are finalized and not yet paid, which is the smallest component of that. Honorable Bateman's question on NSFAS, and the structural deficit. Part of the problems within the NSFAS is really around the financial governance in its budgeting system and the requirement that the Minister of Finance should concur to the budget that then impacts its intake. And the intake that in the last cycle that has resulted in this deficit needs to be managed downwards in the way that is then affordable to the institution. So we're not too worried about what they need to do there. It's about restoring the requirements in both the NSFAS Act and the PFMA around how it manages its budget. And then lastly, Honorable Ndlovu's question around the National Water Infrastructure Agency and the funding model. This isn't necessarily related to water services and water boards. It deals with the merger of the water trading entity and the Trans-Caledon Tunnel Authority. So it's a water resources agency restructuring that then would allow us to use the financing of the assets that sits within the water trading entity to finance new dam infrastructure in a different way than the kind of pure project finance model that should allow for some cross-subsidization and hopefully bring down the price of water or the cost of building infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ulrika. Ukhalalitseng, any thing to add on municipal finances, debt challenges and grant reform?
Okay, thank you, DG. Good morning, Chairs, honorable members. Maybe let me start with the question from Honorable Kaleka Masibuk about the rescheduling of the Tigerberg and Klipfontein. So it was because there were delays in the projects, but essentially they're not losing money. They're saying we can't spend it now. Can you give it next year? So that's the rescheduling is all about. So they're going to get that money. So on the issues of the municipal debt relief, in terms of what are we doing to ensure that the debt doesn't balloon, there are a number of mechanisms. Some are doing in year. For example, we have done an issue of withholding the equitable share tranches to municipalities where we ask them to pay those water boards and service providers that they owe, and they've done that, and we managed to give them all their money during the July equitable share transfer. So the second one, obviously, members will know that we do have a debt relief program that we're continuously monitoring, that we have the conditions on, and we're working on some mechanism to improve that part of where we ensure that they're able to pay ESCOM, especially in that regard. We do have a smart meter grant where we put smart meters in those municipalities to ensure that they collect more revenue as well. So in terms of the number of municipalities that could not implement MIG from Honorable Alexander, we do have 21 in the current financial year. So essentially then DCOC and MISA, they're implementing on behalf of those municipalities. In terms of what are we doing to ensure that the spending, from our side, we do monitor monthly.
Please speak to the microphone where we've lost you a little bit there.
Okay, sorry, Chair. So we monitor monthly the spending and on a quarterly basis. And in addition to that, the support that has been provided by a DCOC through the Municipal Infrastructure Support Agency, where they assist with the implementation and capacity that are building in those municipalities, as well as we're working with the provincial treasuries and also the Kokta family to ensure that we help municipalities. But obviously, where the challenges persist, we might find ourselves stopping and reallocating that money to other municipalities that are performing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And then to end from our side, Edgar, if there's anything you want to add on the debt stabilization path and the fiscal stance. And then that ends it from our side, Minister.
Thank you, DG. Thank you, Chair. Very quickly, I think our strategy, as we indicated, which we announced in 2023, did not announce a specific number for debt stabilization. The focus was on making sure that debt stops growing and starts coming down, and that is happening. That is the strategy. We never said we're targeting this number or that number. In fact, we were advised by the IMF not to do that because the denominator, which is nominal GDP, is not in our control, and that determines the ratio. So that's a big part of the strategy. So we consider the strategy was correct, and it is reaping fruit. With respect to the debt ceiling, I think for us, we are busy with this work on fiscal anchors. We've not ruled anything out. So there's no issue of something being off the table. At the same time, it is important that whatever it is that we advance or propose, and I think this was illustrated by the events around the private members bill on this issue a few years ago, has to be something that can be explained fairly easily to both policymakers as well as to the ordinary citizen, because if it's too complicated or difficult to explain, it's difficult to get people to take ownership of something that they can't understand. And the IMF did acknowledge that in advising a debt ceiling, they had a formula that was very complicated and difficult to explain. And so there's a lot more work to be done in that regard. I'll stop there, DG.
Thank you, Minister. Commissioner?
Chair, this is an impossible task, but let me try and see between myself and Dr. Makubu to use the next 15 minutes or so. So let me just say, I think there's an important...
Yeah, if you take all 15 minutes,
Okay,
the minister will have to echo what you are saying.
Let me see, but I'm not going to do a good job. I think it's important that members understand there's no direct correlation between economic activity and revenue performance, as some may intimate. What finally ends up in the revenue fund reflects what happens in the economy, of course, but also the culture of compliance with citizens, and importantly, the effectiveness of tax administration. So that's what we call the revenue management system. And it is the systemic impact of these variables that has resulted that SARS over the long term has had a consistent long-term buoyancy trend of 1.2%, which is, we've always performed better than the economy. And for post-COVID, that is 1.35. Year to date, you also have to understand why in an economic environment that's projected to be at 5.3, SARS revenue growth has been 9.3 and is projected to grow at 9.9. In that context, compliance revenue has, on a CAGR basis, grown by over 16%, and just this year, 14%. So unless you understand the entire system, you can't, on a transactional basis, analyze or understand revenue performance. You've asked quite rightly what we do with the investment, and I'll give some response on that. But just for this year, within the understanding that the wage bill is lower than expected, imports significantly lower than what expected, and all variables down, the VAT performance of 8 billion against prime printed estimate, 5.8% of that is compliance revenue. Why? Because we have a 3.5 billion down on import VAT, even though we have had the 5 billion up on domestic VAT. The set-off then comes from compliance revenue. On the 3.8 better than PE performance, 2.5 billion of that is compliance, of which a significant component is us invoking paragraph 19.3, which is raising additional provisional payments. The PIT, we know why it's lower. It's lower because even though we have a good performance in terms of payroll administered, which is pay as you earn, we have seen a significant decline in provisional payments, and we're focusing on that. Fuel levy and dividend taxes then produces the others. The question to once-off versus sustainable revenue, again, you can't look at it transactionally.
Because every year we have so-called once-off. And we accommodate that in our modeling. The overall strategic intent, though, is the real undergird for sustainable revenue performance comes from, one, broadening the tax base. And we've seen that grow from 27 to over 33 million taxpayers. Two, improving overall compliance. We've seen that improve from 62 to 69%. Payment compliance, we've seen that improve from 81 to 85%. We have to deal with the illicit economy, and we're not doing enough. And it is that ultimately gives you the superior revenue performance. It's not tweaking individual things. And if you don't understand that, you'll always get it wrong. And so this is why we continue to plead for the investment in SARS, and we continue to plead for funding certainty in SARS, which we don't have. Coming to the return on investment, we look at that through two lenses. The first is, what benefit do we give taxpayers from the additional investment? Well, this year, 5.8 million taxpayers didn't have to file a return because of the deployment of technology and data science. 97% of our returns are filed online. 90% of the assessments of the 2 million who filed receives an assessment outcome in under 5 seconds. We pay out 440 billion rands of refunds in under 72 hours. Taxpayer services up from 54 to 87%, and taxpayer trust in SARS is up from 48 to 75%. That's the return on investment to taxpayers. What's the return on investment to government? Well, the additional revenue over the last 5 years from compliance work is 1.4 trillion rand. Not insignificant. That's 13.5% of total revenue collected. AI detection has helped us prevent the payout of fraudulent refunds of over 440 billion rand in the last 5 years. We've been able to detect and resolve 1,200 illicit criminal cases over the 5 years using our AI risk detection capability. We've unwound 4 illicit schemes. We've been successful at court judgments, 83%, 98% criminal cases. We've resolved 219 state capture cases worth 5.5 billion rand. And we've resolved 10 Zondo Commission matters, which has been fully implemented. And we have handed over 83 illicit tobacco cases to the NPA. That's the return on the investment. Let me just very quickly say on the debt, I'll ask the Deputy Commissioner to talk to that. But we've so far collected 56 billion of a promised 120 billion. That means we have 64 billion to get. The debt collecting is more complex, and I'll ask him in a moment to talk to that, how we are approaching that. If we had time, we can talk more about the illicit economy, but in order not to get into trouble with the Minister and the Deputy Minister, I'll ask Johnson to talk very quickly on debt.
Thank you, Commissioner, and greetings to the honorable chairs and members. I think what's important to note on debt is that our debt is cyclical. We know that when people get bonuses around November, we are able to see an increased collection because there is cash flow in the system. And therefore, we target our activities to increase in that time. We also know that corporates in general, when they close their financial years around March, they are able to want to close on all liabilities, potential liabilities that they have with SARS, and therefore they do approach us in this regard. We have taken a number of initiatives, including a fast-track compromise program that we have taken up with recognized controlling bodies so that they're able to come forward on behalf of their members to try and ensure that there is some responsible compromise. If I just give color to that, we have about 800 million rands that we've been approached about in terms of compromise. But again, responsible compromising of debt becomes important. We are being offered anything between 10 and 15% on that debt. So you need to be careful how you are able to compromise. So that is one initiative that we are running. So we've got a number of these initiatives that are running. We are optimistic that we should be able to get to the 120 or the 20 billion that is being referred to by the end of the financial year. However, I think it's important to caution that increasingly collecting debt is becoming difficult, which means that your enforcement activities now need to increase. Civil judgments, piercing the corporate veil to go after directors of entities, which again is challenged legally. So we are continuing in that front. There's a question, Commissioner, that I just think I need to address. As we continue around issues of containers and how much we scan containers, etc., when we talk about modernization of our ports of entry, it becomes very important that we don't talk about the quantity of scanners that we have in the system, but the technology that we have. Countries like China have got inline scanners, so you can have one scanner that scans 100%, and you can be able to then ride on your risk management framework to pick up those scans that you think should be addressed in terms of interventions. So we work with the BMA. We've got an implementation protocol to make sure that we are coordinated in the approach that we take. The risk, honorable members, we have is that we can have quite a number of initiatives that duplicate and therefore are not effective. It's important that we're able to work together as a whole of government to ensure that we optimize every rand that is spent towards trying to drive compliance. Thank you.
Then quickly on the reasons why there's a weak correlation between the JSE performance and the GDP. Well, first of all, JSE reflects also JSE listed companies that have global exposure, like the big tech and commodities companies, whereas the GDP reflects mostly domestic performance. There's a strong sector bias. About 25 to 30% of the Aussie index is based on more on gold and platinum, and also other tech issues. The JSE also has an element of future expectations and expectations of policy shift. So it has an optimism bias or a pessimism bias, which then inflates confidence in share prices. There's also an important distinction that the stock exchanges reflects the financial economy, whereas the GDP reflects more the real economy. I think just if you look at the current year, whereas the GDP is at a low range, the Aussie already has a year-to-date growth of over 35%. And it's because of the makeup, domestic versus international, but also closer to the real economy as opposed to the financial economy. Thank you.
Can we have remarks from the Minister?
Thank you very much, Chairperson or Co-Chairperson, for this particular meeting. I think I want to start with the inflation targeting regime, and I want to start with the conspiracy theory was first peddled in the Sunday Times, that the minister had gone to the United States recently to meet with Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, who changed his mind in the inflation target. That is inaccurate. The minister, in fact, did not travel to Washington. He had delegated me to do so. And in that time, I can also say the following, in full disclosure to Parliament, that JP Morgan we did take a meeting with them. Goldman Sachs did reach out. Unfortunately, I took 28 meetings in 5 days, so there was no meeting with Goldman Sachs in Washington. So it was impossible for a secret meeting in Washington to have done the inflation target. The conversation with JP Morgan revolved around our sovereign credit rating and the impact of trade issues and trade imbalances and the global trade rebalancing on our economy and how that would impact our credit rating. There was no discussion at all in that meeting of the inflation target. So I want to make that very clear. And so it would have been physically impossible for the minister to have been convinced in Washington because he wasn't there. Let me say that. Then on the inflation target, and I think there was a question around aggregate demand and low-income households. The reality is that when you start protecting the value of low-income households' meager earnings through social grants and so on, and over time, prices are more stable, the consequence of that is that you raise aggregate demand because you have your lowest income consumers able to consume at the same level over time, rather than having their consumption eroded. Think about it this way. If you are a wealthy person or a poor person, you need a tube of toothpaste every couple of weeks. If you erode the earnings of very poor people, they will have to choose between toothpaste and food. But if you protect the value of their earnings, they don't need to make those choices. And so you begin to stabilize aggregate demand. And I think it's important to start thinking about the inflation targets in those terms as well. And what it does when you're in a country where you've got 16 million people on welfare, and how critically important it is as a social stabilizer to have low and stable inflation to protect their ability to purchase and consume. Then on debt, there was also comments on the online platform relating to loans and conditionalities from the IMF and World Bank. I just want to say South Africa's debt profile is 90% rand denominated, 10% FX, foreign currency denominated. The World Bank loan that was taken out recently, which I think is driving some of these comments, was for the Metro Trading Services reform on the program for results, which means the money is only dispersed as the metros get their results and demonstrate improvements in infrastructure. And so it is not a sort of cash injection to spend however we want. It's under a very specific set of conditions that have nothing to do with austerity and everything to do with infrastructure build. And it's to help create the right incentives for our metro municipalities to sort out their water services, their energy, their refuse removal, and their sewage and sanitation. And I do want to be clear on that. So the debt profile has not changed. The borrowing strategy has not changed. We are not taking orders from any foreign institutions. 90% of our debt is rand denominated. And the gross borrowing requirements are on page 28 of the MTBPS. In the interest of full transparency, this is published every year. On the issue of excise tax that multiple members raised, I think it was quite important. And I think the minister, by elevating this topic this year, has done the country a favor to put the spotlight on it. The reality is that SARS can do its work, the Treasury can do its work, but unless we have certainty of prosecution on criminals and the NPA, we will not solve the problem. And the Treasury is not a prosecuting authority. If you look at all of the literature on all kinds of crime, violent crime, financial crimes, and so on, the biggest deterrent is certainty of prosecution. And until we get certainty of prosecution, the minister and I have discussed this as one of the reasons why it ended up in the speech, is to try to put the spotlight on it, because we want certainty of prosecution on these kinds of financial crimes, because that would deter the criminal behavior that we're seeing. Then on growth and structural problems and peaking of debt, I think it's important to understand that high debt is a chokehold on growth, because what it does is it raises your country's risk-free rate. And we are in an environment where global sovereign debt will reach 100% of GDP within 2 years of global GDP. By moving in the opposite direction as countries begin to struggle with debt, other emerging markets and so on, we lower our risk-free rate, and that makes us a more attractive destination for investment over time. And that is why it's critically important that we've now reached this peak. We've communicated it to the markets and to investors and so on. We'll be held accountable for making sure we maintain this peak, because it makes us a less risky investment destination. The reality is, if you carry on borrowing, higher debt leads to higher interest, which then chokes off growth. So it's absolutely critical. Then, Honorable Beasley, you raised deputy ministers and don't know what they're doing. I do want to finish off, Minister, by just saying that the Minister of Finance delegated to myself and David Masonda specific responsibilities within a month of us being appointed, within the first month. And my delegations from the Minister of Finance is intergovernmental relations, corporate services, so the day-to-day management of the Treasury. If he wants to take a flight, I have to sign off. So he's put himself in some trouble there. SADC, Commonwealth Ministers of Finance. I'm also the executive authority for the Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors, the Cooperative Banks Development Agency, the Ombuds Council for the Financial Sector Regulation Act, the Office of the Pension Fund Adjudicator, the Accounting Standards Board, as well as I've been delegated to one constitutional institution, which is the Fiscal and Finance Commission. Deputy Minister Masonda also has a long series of delegations. In the interest of time, I won't read out all of his, but I can assure you that in the National Treasury, deputy ministers are working very hard. Thank you very much.
Just 4 points, quick one. On the crime issue, the question we must ask ourselves is the accountability issue. Is it a money problem or something else? In addition to its budget, the police department, they've got their normal budget. But over the past 3 years, including this one, we've given them from the CARA fund an average of 1 billion per annum, in addition to their budget. for crime. Now, I wanted to make that point and say, there's some way this committee must find a way of getting accountability for those expenditures. The three other points are largely political. Two of them are masquerading as economics. Let me start with the political statement by an honorable member of the Triple Challenge. We might not have used the formulation of a triple challenge in the document, but if you look at the expenditures, they talk to the triple challenge. Among others, 61% of the non-interest spending goes to the poor categories of vulnerable communities. In addition, we are providing municipalities 160, in this financial year, 106 billion rand for basic services. All of those things are intending to deal with the triple challenges. The second issue raised was the supply side economics. I think if it depends on how you diagnose the economy, the South African economy needs intervention on the supply side and demand side. If you look at what we're talking about logistics, you talk to Kumba, they can't transport iron ore because of the logistic. Then the problem is on the supply side. So in our intervention, we've got to use both supply side and demand side intervention. And that's what we have done. If you look at the infrastructure side and that spending, it's a stimulate demand, it's an intervention on the demand side. Lastly is the inflation targeting. The first one is a consultation. If you read my statement, it's clear that consultation is not about everybody on earth. Consultation is within government, with the president and the cabinet. Then I come to this house, and this house then must interrogate my presentation. That's what we're doing today. But there's a mistaken economic argument, an assumption in this economic argument, and that argument is that inflation targeted, but of necessity, will generate high interest rate and therefore higher cost, which is a problem because what we have said, currently things stands in inflation is hovering around 3%. We're just reinforcing that. And our projection is that interest rate as a result of a lower inflation are also going to come down, which will cushion the impact on the poor and their cost of living. So it cannot be true we've also made the point that in case of shocks to cover Honorable Nkwangwa, a tolerance band, we've allowed for that tolerance band in case of shock. But it cannot be true that inflation, the assumption is that there will all necessarily be an increase in interest rate and therefore attack the poor, and Godongwana hates black people. The problem is, I sympathize with you because when Mandela was released, you were 8 years, 8 months.
Honorable Minister,
we know the months.
We know the months.
Yeah. 8 years, 8 months. So you don't have an understanding of the struggle for black people. You don't have an understanding of that. It's the same thing with our colleagues from the MK. They assume that their president never ran this country. When their president ran this country, he took 53 billion rand from the Defense Force, 42 billion rand from the police, 243 billion rand from education and health to fund state capture and state-owned enterprises. Now they come and lecture us about this sort of thing. Let's be rational about it. Let's have a rational debate. Let's not talk about if the inflation targeting, it must be attacked on the soundness of the economics. On the soundness of the economics, not on some funny thing of 8 months, 8 years, 8 months.
Minister.
Madiba.
Honorable members and the Minister, I'm going to request in future, Honorable Minister, to talk through the chair, not to interpersonalize the matters. But given that you have allocated one another's birth certificates, I will, at this point, honorable members, I would have wished to have a follow-up in the second round. Honorable member, the difficulty is that time, the meeting was scheduled for 1 o'clock. I will finish and then I will recognize you. I have requested that if there are additional questions, they can be put forward in writing. I will also request, from a process point of view, that when we get to the budget in February, that this meeting resumes at 9 a.m. The notion of it starting at 10 is genuinely not helpful. We had that previously. We moved it from Thursday to Friday to avoid the conflict of stringent time. You will remember it used to start on Thursday, post-caucus, before the National Assembly. We moved it to Friday. Now we are starting later on a Friday. I'm going to request that it starts at 9. Honorable member, before we close the meeting.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think you've covered me partially. So if you look at the program of SCOF alone, I mean, Alan can share it, our secretary. Our meetings start at 9 and they can even go beyond 2 o'clock to 3 o'clock and even sit again in the evening. Now here, we've got 3 committees that are sitting in this meeting. So to schedule it for 3 hours, it's practically impossible. And I don't understand why we keep doing that to ourselves. Because ESCOF alone, that time is not enough. I mean, there's so much to engage the minister and the commissioner on this MTBPS. But when we're scheduled, we're locked within the 5 minutes. We're not doing justice. Let's not use this platform to really rubber stamp, but let's use it to interrogate and understand. We are members of parliament. We are leading constituencies. It is our duty to go to explain to our constituencies. And we all agree that we want South Africa to run. That we agree. So, but why do we then do this to ourselves by just wanting to tick a box? My request is, let's schedule it for the whole day, Chair, to have this such engagement, because this is the only platform we have.
Thank you.
Everything else is going to be running to other committees. I think.
I have noted your input, honorable member. I will request, as I've made the practical suggestion, and certainly in preparation for the budget in February, let us make the appropriate adjustments likewise. And furthermore, honorable member, it is also common cause that at least the minister or the deputy minister are allocated to come to the respective committees to deal with some of the discussions that unpack from there. Honorable Moiklin, unless it's urgent and pertinent, can I recognize you?
Chair, my request is that the rest, all written questions will be submitted and we get responses on that, please.
Sure, but I did make that input earlier on to say members can write their questions through the committee secretariat and the department will respond. I mean, clearly it is sine qua non to say that. So let me at that point, honorable members, thank the department, thank the ministry and the SARS commissioner and deputy commissioner for being here. Truly appreciate your time. It is now 10 past 1 o'clock. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.